My daughter invited me out to her luxury getaway deep in the canyons for the weekend, claiming she wanted to patch things up between us. But when I woke up, she was gone, and I was locked inside a cage of reinforced glass and steel, right in the middle of a record-breaking, historic Arizona heatwave. No water, no electricity. Inside that sealed greenhouse, the temperature was climbing past 120 degrees. She thought the extreme heat would be enough to end things for a stubborn old man. She figured I'd pass out from dehydration and leave my entire estate to her. But she forgot one important detail. I served 35 years with the U.S. Marshal Service. I don't just give up because someone wants me to. I only leave when I'm good and ready. Before I tell you how I broke out of that glass tomb, let me know in the comments where you're watching this video from. And if you believe that betrayal always brings its own consequences, hit that like button and subscribe. My name is Arthur Pendleton. In the quiet red rock town of Sedona, Arizona, most people just know me as a retired senior citizen with a slight limp who spends his time keeping his cactus garden looking sharp. They have no idea that for over 3 decades I was a senior deputy marshal tracking down high-profile fugitives. They don't know how many days and nights I spent staked out in the blazing heat of the Sonora Desert, where the sun feels like a heavy weight pressing down on your shoulders. I retired to this canyon looking for peace, not conflict. I wanted to hear the wind echoing through the red rocks, not the sound of sirens and standoffs. But I had to learn a harsh lesson the hard way. Sometimes, the most dangerous threat isn't a criminal with a rifle waiting for you at the border. Sometimes the threat shares your last name, and they're sitting right across from you at the dinner table. It was a Saturday morning in mid-June. The weather reports had been warning everyone for days that an unprecedented heat dome was settling over the southwest. The air was dry and heavy, and breathing it in felt like swallowing hot sand. I was sitting on my porch, working on my ammunition reloading equipment. It's my routine. Measuring the powder, checking the casings, pressing the bullets. It keeps my hands busy and my mind sharp. I heard the engine before I ever saw the vehicle. A brand new, low-humming Rivian electric SUV came roaring down my gravel driveway. I didn't look up right away. I took my time finishing the last .45 caliber round, placed it neatly into the ammo box, and only then did I raise my eyes to look at the truck. The doors opened, and out stepped my daughter, Harper, and her husband, Julian. I hadn't seen them in 8 months. The last time we spoke, Harper was screaming into the phone, calling me a selfish, cold-hearted hoarder because I refused to hand over $3 million to bail out her tech startup in Silicon Valley, some revolutionary blood testing company that was clearly falling apart. I told her back then that money is made through sweat and honest work, not by selling big promises on a PowerPoint slide. She slammed the phone down and hadn't called since. But today they looked completely different. Julian was wearing a Patagonia vest and expensive casual leather shoes, doing his best to look like a smooth, successful Silicon Valley venture capitalist. Harper was in a sleek athletic outfit, looking like she just stepped out of a high-end lifestyle magazine. But I noticed how her eyes scanned my property. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at the land. She was calculating the acreage, estimating the current market value. "Dad," Harper called out, forcing a smile that never reached her eyes. "You look good. Really good." I stayed right where I was, in my rocking chair. "You're standing on my property, Harper. Get straight to the point." Julian stepped forward, his shoes clicking loudly against the stone patio. "Come on, Arthur. Don't be like that. Father's Day is coming up. We realized we've been terrible. We missed you. We want to make things right." He handed over a high-end thermal gift box. Inside was expensive Wagyu beef and black truffle sauce, the kind of thing you grab from a luxury grocery store at the last minute when you forgot to buy a real present. I looked at the box, then looked up at him. "You drove all the way from San Francisco just to hand me some steak?" I asked. Harper laughed nervously. "No, Dad. We're here to take you out for a break. Julian recently bought a property near a slot canyon by Lake Powell. It's a completely off-grid, luxury eco-cabin made of reinforced glass and aerospace aluminum. It's beautiful. We want to take you there for the weekend. Just the three of us. No business, no arguing, just like when we used to go camping when I was a kid. Just relaxing. I looked at my daughter. I wanted to believe her. Every father wants to believe his child loves him. I still remembered the little girl who used to sit on my knee, begging me to tell her stories about catching the bad guys. I missed that little girl. But the woman standing in front of me couldn't keep her eyes still. She was sweating, and it wasn't just because of the desert heat. I don't know, Harper, I said, wiping my hands with a rag. It's scorching today. The news said it could hit over 110 this afternoon. That's exactly why the cabin is perfect, Julian chimed in quickly. It's completely climate-controlled, Arthur. We've got the AC blasting. There's a fridge packed with cold craft beer, and we even brought your favorite Pappy Van Winkle bourbon. Please give Harper a chance to apologize properly. I hesitated. My gut instinct, the same instinct that saved my life dozens of times during my 30 years in law enforcement, was whispering in my ear, something is wrong. Why now? Why are they suddenly so generous? Harper was broke. I knew she was broke because my contacts at the SEC told me Julian's venture fund was under a quiet federal investigation for wire fraud. They were backed into a corner. So where did they get the money to buy an incredibly expensive luxury eco-cabin? But then I saw the look on Harper's face. There was a deep sense of desperation there. Maybe she really did realize she was losing her only family. Maybe she was truly out of options and wanted to come home. All right, I said, standing up. I'll go. But I'm driving my own Ford Raptor behind you. Perfect! Harper clapped her hands. I sent the coordinates to your phone. The place is called the Desert Eye. I went inside to change. I put on lightweight tactical cargo pants, a breathable cotton shirt, and my wide-brimmed cowboy hat. Then I walked over to the dresser. In the very bottom drawer, wrapped in a velvet cloth, was my old military tactical watch from my days on the Special Operations Unit. It wasn't a luxury watch. It was a heavy, rugged piece of gear, covered in scratches from years of hard use. It had a built-in, encrypted GPS beacon with a 10-year battery life. It was incredibly ugly, but to me, it was worth more than gold. I strapped it to my wrist. The familiar weight made me feel grounded. By the time we drove deep into that isolated canyon, waves of heat were rising off the ground, distorting the air over the pavement. When I finally saw the Desert Eye, I raised an eyebrow. The architecture was stunning. A panoramic glass dome built right into the red rock wall, modern, cold, and reflecting the blinding sunlight. It was definitely out of their price range. They had to have rented it just to set this trap for me. We walked inside. The rocks outside were hot enough to fry an egg, but the main cabin's central air conditioning was blasting, making the interior feel like an icebox. Harper immediately walked over to the bar. Want some bourbon, Dad? She asked, holding up the bottle of aged Pappy Van Winkle. It's only 10 in the morning, Harper, I replied. It's 5 o'clock somewhere, she said, forcing a smile as she poured a heavy glass of whiskey. Come on, a toast to family. I took the glass. I didn't want to drink. Alcohol dulls your senses, and out in the middle of nowhere, I needed to stay fully sharp. But I didn't want to start an argument right away either. To family, I said. I brought the glass to my lips. I let the liquid touch my tongue, and then I pretended to swallow. When she turned around to grab a beer for Julian, I spit the bourbon back into the glass, holding the last bit in my cheek until I could use a napkin to wipe it away. Back when I worked undercover infiltrating criminal groups, I used that trick 100 times to stay sober during dangerous meetings. They showed me around the eco-cabin. It was completely isolated. There wasn't a soul for miles to the south, a total dead zone. Why pick a place so far out? I asked, looking out the window at the Red Canyon walls. There isn't a single bar of cell service here. Julian avoided my gaze, looking out toward the horizon. We just wanted total peace and quiet, Arthur, away from all the noise of the city. Harper walked out of the bedroom, having changed into a lightweight silk outfit, holding another drink. Here you go, Dad, she said, handing me a fresh glass. You finished that last one fast. Figured you needed a refill. I already took the empty glass. Thanks, I said. I pretended to take a huge gulp, then let my body sway slightly, leaning against the kitchen island to steady myself. Whoa, Arthur, Julian said from behind me. You all right? It's just the heat outside. I lied, and the strong drink. I'm not used to drinking this early. I think I need to lie down for a bit. Harper's eyes lit up. It was a tiny reaction, but I caught it. A brief flash of triumph. Of course, Dad. Her voice suddenly turned incredibly sweet. The guest bedroom is at the end of the hall. It's dark and cool in there. Take a nap and we'll wake you up when lunch is ready. She guided me down the hallway. At the end was a heavy, soundproof door. This is the quietest room, she said, pushing the guest bedroom door open. I stepped inside. The room was small, with only a single skylight made of heavily reinforced glass that was completely sealed shut. The room had a minimalist bed and a built-in metal wardrobe. The AC vent was humming softly, blowing out cool air. Thanks, Harper, I said, sitting on the edge of the bed. I just need an hour. Take your time, she said. She stood in the doorway for a moment, staring directly at me. The smile vanished from her face. Her expression turned completely blank and cold. Sleep well, Arthur, she whispered. She closed the door. I heard the click of the standard door handle latch. Then I heard a different sound, a sound that no guest should ever hear. It was the heavy thud of an external physical locking bar sliding into place. Someone was completely sealing the door from the outside with a steel bolt. Click. I sat there, and even though the adrenaline began coursing through my veins, my heart rate stayed perfectly steady. I stood up, walked to the door, and tried turning the handle. Locked tight. I banged on the door. Harper, Julian, the door's stuck. Dead silence. I pounded harder, the metal rattling under my fists. Julian, stop fooling around. Open the door. I heard frantic footsteps fading down the hallway, followed by the heavy thud of the eco-cabin's main entrance shutting. And then the true nightmare began. The low hum of the air conditioning cut out completely. The smart lights flickered once and died. The entire room plunged into darkness, save for a single harsh beam of sunlight piercing through the glass skylight overhead. The silence that followed was sudden and absolute. Then came the sound of an engine turning over, the sharp whine of the Rivian's electric motor, and the crunch of tires on gravel tore right through the glass. They were leaving. They had brought me out to the middle of nowhere, locked me inside this reinforced glass and metal greenhouse, cut the power, and left me to the elements. I looked down at my wrist. The thermometer on my tactical watch read 75 degrees. But without the AC circulating the air, and with that brutal Arizona sun beating directly down on the glass overhead, that number was going to climb. It was going to climb fast. I surveyed the small room. No water, no food, just the bed and the built-in metal wardrobe. I sat back down on the mattress. Most people would have panicked right then. Most people would have spent their time screaming and frantically throwing themselves against the door until they completely exhausted their oxygen and strength. But I'm not most people. I closed my eyes and took a long, measured breath. So that's the plan, I thought. A tragic case of heat stroke. An unfortunate accident. A retired senior citizen who had one too many drinks accidentally locked himself in the guest room and took a nap while the eco-cabin's solar inverter just happened to malfunction. A heartbreaking tragedy. Julian would put on a big show of wiping away tears at the funeral. Harper would be draped in black, hiding her greedy smile behind a veil. They would step up as the grieving heirs to take over my multi-million-dollar trust fund and the generational ranch in Nevada, the one sitting right on top of a massive, incredibly valuable lithium deposit. It was clever, it was ruthless, and it was happening right now. Panic tried to claw its way up my throat. It's a primitive human instinct. Your brain screams at you. You're trapped. You're baking alive. You're going to fade away alone in the dark. Part of me wanted to roar, to smash my fists against the door until my knuckles split, to curse my daughter's name until my voice gave out. I took another deep breath. The air was already starting to turn hot, carrying a dry, dusty taste. No. I opened my eyes. I am Senior Deputy U.S. Marshal Arthur Pendleton. I've tracked armed fugitives through the deadliest stretches of the border desert on foot, and I've survived blizzards in the Alaskan wilderness. I don't panic. Panic wastes oxygen. Panic spikes your heart rate. Panic forces your core temperature to climb even faster. If I panic, I'm done for. The fear was still there, but I shoved it deep into a corner of my mind and locked it down tight. I checked the thermometer again. 85 degrees. The human body can handle high heat for a short window. But without water, as the surrounding air heats up, your cooling systems completely fail. Sweat stops evaporating. Your core temperature climbs out of control. At 104 degrees, heat exhaustion sets in. At 107, your internal organs literally begin to cook. I calculated the timeline. It was noon. For the next 4 hours, the sun would be at its most intense. This unventilated glass box would hit 110, maybe 120 degrees within an hour. I had about 3 hours, maybe less, before I lost consciousness. I looked around the room again, but this time I wasn't looking as a victim. I was looking like a hunter. There were no windows to smash. The skylight was bulletproof, laminated glass, and even if I could break it, the opening was far too narrow for my shoulders. The door was held by a thick steel bolt on the outside. The walls were aerospace-grade aluminum, lined with heavy insulation. I was in a kiln, but every structure has a weakness. Every system has a back door. I looked up at the ceiling, targeting the AC vent. It was a tiny square grill, maybe 10 inches by 10 inches, far too small to crawl through. I looked at the floor, high-end polished concrete. Then my eyes caught the baseboards in the corner. These minimalist off-grid cabins are usually built with a passive geothermal air exchange system to pull cool air from beneath the ground during freezing desert nights. I dropped to my knees on the floor. I pulled a compact tactical flashlight from my pocket. I always carry one. It's a habit from my decades in law enforcement. I aimed the beam right at the baseboard beneath the bed frame. Right there, held in place by heavy-duty screws, was a rectangular metal access panel. It was small, only about 18 inches wide, but it opened up into the crawl space beneath the foundation. That crawl space would be full of dust, dried scorpions, and desert dirt. It would be incredibly tight, but it was underground. And in an Arizona summer, underground means cool air. Underground means survival. I wiped the sweat from my eyes. Harper thought she had trapped me in a seamless metal box. She forgot that buildings have to breathe. She forgot that my ability to bypass physical barriers was a hell of a lot better than her ability to build them. I pulled my tactical multi-tool from my belt. The heat inside the room was becoming suffocating now. My shirt was completely soaked. My mouth felt like sandpaper. I looked at the heavy screws on the panel, sealed tight with weatherproofing paint. A grim, cold smile crossed my face. "You want to bake me out, Harper? You want to see if the old man can take the heat?" I jammed the screwdriver attachment of the multi-tool hard into the first screw head. Let's see who turns to dust first. The heat inside the cabin was no longer just a weather condition. It felt like a physical weight pressing down on my eardrums, forcing its way deep into my lungs until every breath felt like swallowing broken glass. I looked down at the tactical watch on my wrist. In the dim light, the digital screen seemed to warp. 122 degrees. During survival training in the Marshal Service, they teach you that the human body is just a machine. It has a cooling system, pumps, and regulators. But just like any machine, if you run it past the red line for too long, the gaskets blow. My skin had stopped sweating 10 minutes ago. That was the first critical warning sign. When you stop sweating, it means your body has run completely dry. It means your internal temperature is skyrocketing toward the point of no return. A pounding headache started at the base of my skull, a rhythmic throb perfectly synced with my slow, heavy heartbeat. Thump, thump, thump. I sat on the floor, leaning against the metal access panel I had just pried open. The air coming from the opening was stagnant, smelling of dry dirt and old PVC glue, but it was noticeably cooler than the suffocating air trapped against the ceiling. Hot air rises, basic physics. If I stood up, my brain would be right in the danger zone. So I stayed low. I became a reptile on the concrete. I had to lower my core temperature. I had to cool the blood flowing to my brain before my system started to fail. Through the heat waves blurring my vision, I looked around the room. I saw the luxury leather cushions on the accent chairs. Harper had bragged about them earlier. Imported from Italy, completely custom made. I dragged my heavy body across the floor. My movements were slow now, my joints feeling like they were full of lead. I grabbed the expensive leather and pulled with everything I had left. I didn't care about the cost. With a rough grunt, I ripped the leather clean off the frame, tearing it down the center. I dragged the mass of leather back to the crawlspace opening. I shone my flashlight down into the dark gap. About 3 feet below, right where the AC condensation line drained, was a pool of wet mud. It was a thick soup of desert dirt and rusty water from the drainage pipe. It was dirty, fouled, and smelled awful. But it was liquid, and liquid draws heat away from a body 25 times faster than air. I stuffed the leather into the hole, shoving it down into the dark mud until it was completely saturated, letting it soak up the moisture. When I hauled it back up, it was incredibly heavy, dripping with dark mud and smelling of stagnation. To anyone else, it would have been disgusting. To a man on the verge of heat stroke, it was absolute salvation. I stripped off my shirt. I wrapped the wet, muddy leather around my neck, covering my carotid arteries. I tore off another piece of cloth to wrap around my head and stuffed the rest under my armpits and against my groin, the places where major arteries run closest to the skin. The shock of the wet material made me gasp. It wasn't cold water by any means. It was warm mud. But compared to the blistering air in the room, it felt like pure ice. I lay flat on my back on the polished concrete floor, spreading my arms and legs out like a starfish to maximize the surface area against the stone. Now came the hardest part of all, the weight. I closed my eyes and focused entirely on my breathing. Back in tactical survival school, they teach you how to master panic. Inhale for 4 seconds. Hold for 4 seconds. Exhale for 4 seconds. Hold for 4 seconds. Inhale 2, 3, 4. The thick smell of the mud made my stomach turn. It cramped violently, trying to reject the crushing heat. I forced myself to swallow down the bile rising in my throat. I couldn't throw up. Throwing up meant losing vital fluids. Losing fluids meant the end. Hold 2, 3, 4. My mind started to drift. That's what extreme heat does to you. It cuts your anchor to reality. I wasn't in an Arizona eco cabin anymore. I was back on the Mexican border, lying face down in the brush, waiting for a cartel convoy to pass. The heat felt exactly the same. The heavy scent of mortality felt exactly the same. Exhale 2, 3, 4. No. Stay focused, Arthur. You're not on the border. You're inside a tomb built by your own daughter. Her name drifted through my mind like a bitter curse. I pictured her sitting in that Rivian with the air conditioning set to maximum, speeding back to Phoenix. She was probably sipping a cold soda right now, laughing with Julian about how easy it had all been. The old man is gone and the lithium ranch is ours. Anger is a powerful fuel, but it burns too hot. I couldn't afford the heat that came with rage right now. I needed the icy discipline of absolute reason. I checked my watch again, or at least I tried to. The digital numbers were swimming. Was it 1 in the afternoon? 2? Time was losing all meaning. Then the room shifted. The dark cabin seemed to light up. The crushing metal walls began to fade away. I saw her standing right there in the corner of the room. Sarah, my wife, my beautiful Sarah, who had passed away 10 years ago. She was wearing the blue summer dress from our trip to the Grand Canyon back in '95. She looked so cool, so radiant. She wasn't sweating at all. She stood by the door, watching me with that gentle, patient smile she always gave me when I came home from a long trip. Arthur, she said, her voice soft like a morning breeze, you look so tired, honey. I blinked hard, the sweat stinging my eyes. Sarah? I forced the name out, my voice sounding like dry bark. How are you here? I came to bring you home, she said, holding out a hand. It's too hot here, Arthur. Too hot. Why don't you just let go? Come with me. It's cool where I am. There's a breeze and I have that iced lemon tea you love. I stared at her. She looked so real. I could even smell her perfume, a faint trace of jasmine cutting right through the stench of the mud. I wanted to move toward her. God, I wanted to hold her hand so badly. My body was screaming for relief. It would be so easy to just close my eyes, let myself drift away, stop fighting, and let the heat take me. It would all be over. Just rest, Arthur, she whispered, taking a step closer. You've fought enough battles. You raised our daughter. You did your duty. You can rest now. Just rest. The words felt like a fatal lullaby. I raised a hand toward her, my fingers trembling uncontrollably. But then I saw it. Just behind her, standing in the shadows, was Harper. She wasn't smiling. She was checking her watch. She was waiting for me to take that hand so she could go cash a multi-million-dollar check. If I died here, I lost. If I died, they won. They would take the ranch my grandfather built. They would take my life savings. They would turn everything I stood for into a joke. No, I whispered. Sarah's smile flickered. Arthur, please, honey. No, Sarah. I raised my voice this time, forcing the illusion to shatter. I can't go with you. Not yet. Why? She asked sadly. Because I still have a job to do, I growled. I have to teach that girl a lesson she'll never forget. I squeezed my eyes shut. I bit down hard on my lower lip until I tasted the sharp, metallic tang of blood. The pain was sharp. The pain was real. It cut right through the fog. I opened my eyes. Sarah was gone. The blue dress was gone. There was only the cold wall, the suffocating heat, and the heavy scent of my own survival. I rolled over onto my stomach. The movement made the room spin. I dry heaved, my empty stomach cramping painfully. I am not dying today, I hissed at the concrete. I am Senior Deputy, U.S. Marshal Arthur Pendleton, and I am not letting this glass box be my grave. I looked back down at the access panel, that dark opening leading into the foundations of the structure. I was clear-headed enough to think now. The muddy leather had bought me some time, but my clock was running out. The temperature inside the room was still climbing. If I stayed here, it was over. I had to move. I had to get out. The door wouldn't budge. The skylight was unreachable. That left only one way. I shone my flashlight down into the hole. It was tight, filthy, and lined with sharp rock edges, jagged concrete, and bundles of wiring. But it led to the external ventilation shaft, and that shaft opened out to the desert. I dragged my body toward the opening. I'm coming for you, Harper, I whispered. I pushed my head into the darkness ahead. There was heat waiting down there, and there was danger. But today I was the one to be feared. The darkness beneath the floorboards wasn't empty. It was filled with the choking scent of dry earth and the heavy thud of my own pulse roaring in my ears. I was down in the crawl space, the absolute lowest point of the structure. It was incredibly tight, barely leaving enough room to crawl on my elbows and knees, dragging my body through a layer of sharp gravel and red dirt that stuck to my skin like a second layer of sweat. But this was where I would find my exit. I aimed my tactical light upward. There, right ahead, was the main exhaust shaft leading outside. These cabins circulate air through large side vents. If I could get into that vent, I could push my way out through the rock face. But there was a problem. A heavy steel wire mesh blocked the entrance, secured to the concrete by 4 heavy-duty security screws. They were locked down tight, tightened by machine. I reached for my waist. I was wearing a thick leather duty belt with a solid brass buckle. I unbuckled it. That buckle was thick with a flat edge. It wasn't a perfect screwdriver, but in the hands of a desperate man, it was a tool for demolition. I jammed the edge of the brass buckle into the groove of the first screw. I applied torque. My hands were slick with mud and sweat. The buckle slipped, cutting a deep gash across my thumb. I didn't feel it. Pain is just information. It tells you the body is still functioning. I wiped my hand on my pants and tried again. I grit my teeth until my jaw ached, channeling every ounce of frustration and fury I felt toward Harper and Julian into that small piece of brass. Turn, I ordered. The screw gave a harsh metallic screech. It turned a quarter inch, then a little more. 1 down, 3 to go. The heat down here felt different. It wasn't the dry, baking heat of the cabin above. It was a humid, suffocating weight, like being inside a closed space. My vision was narrowing into a tunnel, black spots dancing in the beam of my flashlight. I worked methodically. Turn, slip, bleed, turn again. The second screw stripped. The head was completely worn down. I cursed out loud, slamming my fist against the concrete, the dull thud echoing in the tight space. I couldn't stop now. I wedged the brass buckle in at a sharp angle, slamming the heel of my palm against it until it bit into the soft metal of the screw head. I twisted with everything I had left. It moved. By the time I pried the fourth screw free, my hands were raw. My nails were split, but the wire mesh finally came loose. I kicked it away and it clattered down into the ductwork, kicking up a thick cloud of dust. I wiped my eyes and looked up. It was a square ventilation tunnel, lined with galvanized sheet metal. It was narrow, maybe only 18 inches wide. My shoulders were broad, built from decades of training. This was going to be an incredibly tight squeeze. I grabbed the edge of the duct and pulled myself up. The metal was scalding, having absorbed the brutal heat of the sun all day. It burned the skin on my forearms, but I didn't stop. I forced my upper body inside. My chest scraped the bottom. My back scraped the top. I was a round jammed inside the barrel of a gun. I had to exhale completely, emptying my lungs just to move forward an inch at a time. I wiggled forward inch by inch. The air inside the pipe was stifling and thick with dust, tasting heavily of fiberglass insulation. Panic tried to take over again. Claustrophobia is a primal fear, the dread of getting stuck, of running out of space in a metal throat, unable to move forward or back. I closed my eyes, remembering my old training. I thought of the Marshals Service tactical exercises where they bind your limbs and make you navigate tight spaces. You don't fight the environment. You become part of it. I stopped fighting the pipe. I flowed through it. I shifted my hips, pulled with my fingertips, and pushed with my toes. My clothes tore. A rogue rivet sliced the skin on my back, leaving a trail of sweat and blood along the galvanized steel. Forward, always forward. And then I saw it. A change in the light. It wasn't the blinding white of the sun anymore. It was the soft, deep blue of the desert evening. I had reached the end of the vent. There were exterior louvers here, angled slats designed to keep the rain out. I smashed my fist right through them. They were only hard plastic, shattering easily. I pushed my head out. The air hitting my face felt like an absolute blessing, even though the desert evening was still hovering around 90 degrees. Compared to the furnace I had just escaped, it felt like breathing the fresh air of heaven. I hauled my shoulders through, then my hips, and tumbled out of the rock face, crashing heavily onto the rough red sandstone of the canyon floor. I lay there for a long time, staring up at the blanket of stars. My chest heaved violently, my body trembling from the crash of adrenaline and pure dehydration. I survived. I rolled over and looked around. I was deep inside the canyon, isolated, silent. The eco-cabin sat a dozen feet above me, looking like a dark, lifeless tombstone. I forced myself up. My legs were shaking, and I had to lean heavily against a massive boulder just to keep from falling back down. I stared at the structure. It was equipped with an emergency satellite phone. I could easily climb back up, break in, and call for emergency services. I could fire a flare. I could wait for a rescue helicopter to pull me out of this hellhole. I took a step toward the rock face, and then I stopped. If I called for help now, Harper and Julian would win. They would claim it was all just a terrible accident. They would blame it on a glitch in the smart system, saying the door locked automatically and they had no idea. Harper would play the role of the relieved, grieving daughter, shedding crocodile tears for the cameras. She would bring me home, force me into a high-end care facility, and claim the trauma left me confused and incapable of managing my own assets. Then, with heavy medication and endless neglect, she would quietly finish the job she started today. No, to bring down monsters, you have to become a ghost. I looked out toward the distant horizon. Miles away, a faint ribbon of light cut through the dark, Route 66, running right across the reservation line. I checked my GPS watch. 10 miles. Under normal conditions, a 10-mile night hike through the desert would be a warm-up for an active, geared-up tactical officer. But for a 70-year-old man who hadn't had a drop of water in 10 hours, who had been baked inside a human oven and stripped of a layer of skin in a metal pipe, it was a gauntlet. But I had something Harper didn't account for. I had absolute resolve, and pure will burns cleaner and longer than any fuel on Earth. I staggered over to a patch of prickly pear cactus. Using my multi-tool, I sliced it open, chewing on the bitter, faint moisture inside. I stripped off the shredded remnants of my ruined shirt, keeping only my pants, my duty belt, and my watch. I faced the distant lights of the highway and I started to walk. My pace was steady, efficient, and silent. Keep your head up. Step. Breathe. Step. Breathe. The desert is vast, a massive expanse that makes you feel completely insignificant. In the pitch black, looking down at the lifeless sand beneath your boots, it's easy to let dread take over. It's easy to start imagining diamondback fangs in the dark, or your legs locking up from cramps before you drop like a stone. I lock my focus entirely on those distant highway lights. That's my daughter and son-in-law, I told myself. Those lights represent my home. Those lights represent my life, and they are trying to steal it from me. My arms grew heavy. My legs burned with lactic acid. My thirst came back with a vengeance, so intense that I couldn't even swallow my own saliva. Around the 5th mile, my left calf seized up in a blinding cramp. The sheer agony made me gasp, sending me face first into the sand. I coughed, my mouth filling with dust. The crushing silence of the desert wrapped around me. I rolled onto my back, digging my thumbs hard into the knot in my muscle. Not today, I whispered to the stars. Not a chance. I forced myself back up and kept moving. I visualized Julian's arrogant face. I visualized the deceitful look in Harper's eyes. I replayed the distinct click of that door bolt sliding shut. I used their faces as my compass and their betrayal as my engine. I walked until my mind went completely numb. I walked until I was nothing more than a machine of bone and tendon, advancing relentlessly through the dark desert night. And then the soles of my boots hit asphalt. I stopped. The highway. I stumbled forward a few more steps before my knees finally gave out, dropping me right onto the white line at the edge of the road. I dragged my body up onto the shoulder, pulling myself out of the wilderness like a creature escaping the depths. I collapsed onto the rough pavement, shivering violently. Even though the road was still radiating the leftover heat of the day, I was absolutely freezing. I looked back one last time at the dark desert behind me. Somewhere in that abyss, that expensive eco-cabin stood completely empty. Let them look for me, I thought. Let them go search an empty grave. I lay flat on my back and closed my eyes. I was alive. And now the real hunt begins. When I finally woke up, the rough asphalt was pressing hard against the side of my face. It was a gritty, freezing friction that scraped against the raw, open wounds I'd sustained in the ventilation shaft. I forced one eye open. The sky was bleeding deep shades of purple and orange, the bruised colors of an Arizona desert sunrise. I'm alive. That was the first absolute fact my brain had to process. I was lying in the dirt at the edge of an old service road off Route 66, roughly 10 miles away from the eco-cabin that was supposed to be my final resting place. I let out a dry cough that sounded like a pitchfork scraping over gravel, the taste of dried blood thick in my throat. I tried to stand, but my legs completely refused to cooperate. They felt like solid iron pipes filled with concrete. I rolled onto my back, staring blankly up at the sky. A red-tailed hawk circled high above, its wings gliding silently through the crisp morning air, looking down at me with total indifference. To nature, I was just another piece of debris fading in the sun. To my daughter, I was a missing person who hadn't been found yet. I forced myself into a sitting position, the world spinning violently around me. A severe dehydration headache pounded behind my eyes, feeling like a heavy spike being driven directly into my skull. I checked my tactical watch. 5 in the morning. I had been walking through the desert for nearly 7 hours. I had crawled back from the edge of the abyss and come out the other side. I looked down at myself. I was a complete wreck. My tactical pants were shredded into literal rags, caked in dark mud, grease, and white salt lines from dried sweat. My chest and back were a road map of deep scratches where the galvanized steel had scraped me raw. My skin was burned a deep, angry red. I didn't look like a successful rancher or a retired federal lawman. I looked like a ghost that had just clawed its way out of the earth. I forced myself to my feet, swaying heavily, but I didn't fall. I couldn't go back home. The house in Sedona would be the very first place they'd check. Going home meant stepping right into an unexposed trap. If I walked up to my front door right now, Harper would immediately pivot. She'd claim that dehydration caused a state of delirium. She'd tell everyone the heat stroke made me hallucinate the locked door. She'd have her high-priced psychiatrists line up to declare me mentally unfit before I could even file a legal statement. Rule number 1, I had to stay a ghost, and ghosts don't go home. They hunt. I started limping along the edge of the asphalt. A mile down the road sat a solitary structure, Old Joe's Motel and Service Station, a complete relic of the 1980s, smelling of stale motor oil and cheap coffee. Mounted on the side of the building was a coin-operated payphone, a dinosaur in the age of smartphones. But to a man who needed to remain completely invisible, it was an absolute lifeline. I walked inside toward the night cashier who was dozing off behind the counter. The kid looked up, staring at me like he was seeing a walking corpse. "Need to use the phone," I rasped, my voice sounding like grinding stones. The kid took one look at my torn clothes and the dried blood on my chest, and he didn't ask a single question. On these isolated desert roads, when someone looks that rough coming out of the brush, it's best to keep your mouth shut. He slid a stained landline receiver across the counter. I nodded in thanks. I dialed a number I knew by heart. It rang 4 times. "Speak," a deep voice answered, sharp, alert, and guarded. Elias never slept before dawn. "Code red," I whispered. "Need an extraction. Sector 4, Old Joe's Station on Route 66. The line went completely silent, a silence heavy with the weight of a bond forged under fire. Elias didn't ask who it was. He didn't ask why. Even with my voice completely broken, he knew exactly who was on the other end. "ETA 40 minutes, the voice replied. "Stay out of sight, old friend." I hung up, walked outside into the shadows of the building, and slid down against the wall next to the ice machine to wait. Elias arrived in 35 minutes flat, driving an ordinary black Chevy Suburban instead of the high-end luxury vehicles his private security firm usually utilized. He pulled around to the back of the building, completely out of sight from the main highway. He stepped out, a massive mountain of a man in his late 60s who still carried the build of a special operations veteran. He took one look at me, the muscles in his jaw tightening instantly. Without a word, he pulled open the passenger door and helped me inside. He handed me a heavy military canteen. I took slow, controlled sips of the water, strictly keeping myself from gulping it down to avoid sending my system into shock. "Where to?" Elias asked, turning the engine over. "A doctor?" "No," I cut him off. "Absolutely no hospitals. No records, no paperwork, no paper trail. Take me to the safe house." Elias glanced at me in the rearview mirror, deep concern in his eyes. "You look like you just crawled out of a furnace, Arthur. You need medical attention." "I need to stay dead," I said coldly. "Just drive, Elias." We rode in absolute silence until we reached Elias's isolated cabin, hidden deep in the pine forests outside Flagstaff. The place was entirely off the grid. No internet, no neighbors, just tall trees and silence. Elias helped me inside and brought out a professional medical kit. For the next hour, he cleaned my wounds in total silence, washing the dried dirt from the gashes on my back and applying burn cream to my face. He even hooked me up to an IV saline drip he kept stored for emergencies. Once he finished, I walked into the bathroom. I needed to see what was left of me. I looked into the mirror, and the man staring back was a complete stranger. My eyes were bloodshot, the whites completely gone, replaced by a map of broken red vessels. My cheeks were sunken, the skin stretched tight over my cheekbones, and my lips were cracked and bleeding. The severe sunburn had turned my weathered skin into a mass of peeling blisters. I didn't look like Arthur Pendleton at all. I looked like the manifestation of vengeance. I touched the glass. "Look what she did to me," I whispered to the reflection. "Look what my own daughter did." I walked back into the living room where Elias was brewing fresh coffee. He handed me a mug. "All right, Arthur, talk to me," Elias said, taking a seat across from me. I told him everything. The eco cabin, the fake reconciliation, the bolted door, the cut AC, the extreme heat, the escape through the crawl space, and the long trek through the desert. Elias listened quietly, never interrupting. He ran a private intelligence firm now, but before that, he was the best tracker and operational planner the Marshal Service ever had. He knew exactly how to build an airtight case, and he knew exactly how to make a person disappear. So they tried to bake you alive, Elias said, his voice dropping into a low, dangerous register. That's premeditated attempted murder. Arthur, that's a major felony. We call the Bureau right now. We get federal agents to lock down that eco cabin before they can destroy the physical evidence. No, I took a sip of the black coffee. Elias slammed his hand onto the table. Why not? They tried to end your life, Arthur. Because if we call the authorities right now, it's just my word against theirs, I said calmly. Harper will tell everyone I had one too many drinks and lock myself in. She'll blame it on a glitch in the smart system. They'll bring in a team of high-priced defense lawyers immediately. They'll use my own money to pay for them, dragging the case out in court for years. And while we're tied up in legal battles, they'll be living in my house, driving my cars and burning through my estate. I leaned forward. A sharp pain flared up across the cuts on my back, but I ignored it completely. I want them to think they won, Elias. I want them to feel the weight of all that money right in their hands. I want to watch them stand at my memorial service and deliver their speeches. I want them to sign the insurance claim forms. Elias narrowed his eyes. You want to catch them right in the middle of a massive fraud. I want to catch them at the exact moment they lose everything, I said coldly. I want to watch them fall apart from the inside out. I need you to help me stay a ghost, Elias. As far as the rest of the world is concerned, Arthur Pendleton went missing in that desert canyon and didn't survive the elements. You're listed as one of my emergency contacts. Play along with them. Let them believe the entire kingdom is finally theirs. Elias stared at me for a long time, recognizing the icy resolve in my eyes. The man who had crawled out of that desert wasn't the old friend he knew who had been trying to fix things with his daughter. This was a man on a mission. All right, Elias said softly. You're gone? He stood up, walked over to a television in the corner, and switched it on. The show is already starting, he said. The screen flickered, cutting to a local Phoenix news channel. A bright red breaking news banner rolled across the bottom of the screen, and then there he was, Julian. He was standing right outside the police line at the edge of the canyon reserve. In the background, rescue vehicles and flashing emergency lights filled the frame. Harper stood right next to him, holding a handkerchief up to her completely dry eyes. Julian looked like a total mess. He had intentionally messed up his hair and unbuttoned the top two buttons of his shirt, putting on a perfect display of absolute grief. My father-in-law, he's missing, Julian stammered into the reporter's microphone, his voice trembling right on cue. We just wanted to have a quiet Father's Day weekend away from the city. He had a drink and said he wanted to go for a short walk to see the views. By the time we went to check on him, he was gone. The camera zoomed in, giving him a tight close-up. I think he must have lost his bearings, Julian sobbed, even forcing a slight stumble. The desert is just so vast, and the heat out here is intense. We searched for hours. We called out his name, but it's just so isolated. He buried his face in Harper's shoulder. Harper patted his back, wearing massive sunglasses, posing for the camera, with an expression of heartbreaking tragedy. Please, the reporter turned to the camera. If anyone has seen anything, we just want him back home, Harper whispered into the microphone. We're praying for a miracle. I sat there in the dark cabin, watching my daughter and son-in-law put on an act over my passing. It was a flawless performance. The public would buy it completely. The grieving family, the tragic accident, a wealthy but stubborn old man who had too much to drink and wandered off into a deadly environment. I felt a cold smile spread across my cracked lips. Cry a little louder, girl, I whispered to the screen. Make it look real. I turned back to Elias. Get me an encrypted laptop, I said, and connect me to the security servers at my house. I want to see exactly what they're doing on my property. Elias nodded and headed toward his gear bag. I looked back at the screen one last time. Julian was being guided away from the cameras by an officer, looking completely weak and broken. He thought the story was over. He thought the credits were rolling. He had no idea this was only the opening act. The ghost is back, Harper, and I am going to follow you until you're on your knees, begging for an escape from the very hell I just broke out of. The oatmeal tasted like wet cardboard, lukewarm and completely flavorless. It was the bland, soft food Elias had specifically prepared for me, since my throat was still badly irritated from breathing in all that hot air, and I couldn't swallow anything solid. I sat in the shadows of the safe house corner, wrapped tightly in a heavy blanket that smelled faintly of cedar. The only light in the room came from the faint blue glow of the small television screen sitting on a plastic crate. The flickering shadows stretched and danced across the wood walls, turning the mounted deer head into a silent, strange observer. I forced down another spoonful of the tasteless mush, wincing as a sharp pain flared up in my throat. Every swallow was a reminder. Every heavy breath in my chest was living proof that I had made it out of that glass prison. Elias sat by the window, methodically cleaning a Glock pistol. He didn't look over at me. He didn't need to. We had worked together for far too long. We knew exactly when silence was the best way to communicate. He knew I was watching the news. He knew I was watching my own passing be broadcasted live to the world. The local news anchor, a young woman with perfectly styled hair and a practiced expression, addressed the camera. Breaking news tonight regarding the search for missing retired U.S. Marshal and ranch owner Arthur Pendleton. Search and rescue teams have expanded their perimeter to 50 miles across the Lake Powell Canyon area. But officials state that as we approach the 48-hour mark, hopes of survival in this extreme heat wave are rapidly fading. The broadcast cut to a live feed at the Search Command Center. The place was a total circus. News vans, police SUVs, and crowds of onlookers held back by yellow caution tape. And right in the middle of all that chaos stood the main stars of the show, Harper and Julian. They stood in the dirt, with the steep red walls of the canyon towering behind them. My son-in-law was wearing a wrinkled designer linen shirt with the collar open, giving him a carefully calculated look of pure exhaustion. His hair was a mess. He looked exactly like a man who hadn't slept in days. It was a great look, perfectly rehearsed. Julian stepped up to the microphone and cleared his throat. I stared right at his hands. They were shaking. To the public, it looked like the trembling of deep grief. But to me, it was the unmistakable tremor of a coward who had crossed a line he could never come back from, feeling the sudden weight of his choices. "We just want him home," Julian said into the microphone, his voice cracking perfectly. "My father-in-law is a tough man. He served this country's justice system for over 30 years. If anyone could make it out there, it's him. But the heat, the canyons." He paused, wiping the back of his hand across his face. I should have kept a closer eye on him. I should have stopped him when he walked out of the cabin. I blame myself. I'll always blame myself. Sitting there in the dark safe house, a cold weight settled in my stomach. Of course he blamed himself, not because he didn't save me, but because he didn't stay long enough to confirm I was gone before they drove away. He was putting on a display of guilt, wrapping it up perfectly as the regret of a careless son-in-law. Then the camera shifted to Harper. She was the real masterpiece of this entire performance. She wore a very simple, low-key black outfit, but over her face, she wore a pair of massive designer sunglasses. The dark lenses completely hid her eyes. She gripped Julian's arm tightly, looking like a vine trying to wrap itself around a tree. She didn't say a single word. She just nodded along as Julian spoke, gently dabbing her cheek with a tissue. "Take off the glasses, Harper," I whispered to the screen. "Let me see your eyes." But she kept them on, and I knew exactly why. Because eyes never lie. The mouth can smile, the voice can fake a sob, but the eyes tell the truth. And Harper's soul was nothing more than a cold cash register. If she took those glasses off, the cameras would see her eyes were completely dry. There was only calculation in her gaze. She was using a piece of luxury Italian plastic to hide the fact that she didn't have a single tear to shed. The reporter came back on screen. Authorities state that 3 people have already lost their lives in this historic heat wave across the county, making survival conditions incredibly grim for the 70-year-old veteran. For now, officials are treating this case as a tragic accident pending further investigation. I picked up the remote and hit the mute button. Silence rushed back into the room, heavy and absolute. Elias looked up, setting his tool aside. "They're putting on quite a show, Arthur," he said quietly. "They're buying time. They need a body or a legal declaration of death," I said, my voice sounding rough. "Without the legal paperwork, They can't cash any of those checks. I pushed the bowl of oatmeal away. My appetite was completely gone, replaced by a deep hunger for something else entirely. Information. Hand me that computer, Elias. He passed over a rugged Panasonic Field laptop, the same durable model we used to carry on operations. I booted it up, the blue light of the screen illuminating the cuts across my face. My fingers were stiff, my fingertips raw and bleeding from the heat and the rough stone, but I could still type. I could still track my prey. I didn't need to be a world-class hacker to break into Julian and Harper's digital lives. I didn't need complex lines of code or brute force algorithms. I just needed to act like the same accommodating father who had been paying their bills for years. Harper and Julian's high-end cloud storage and family sharing plans had been tied to my primary account ever since they got married. I paid for that massive monthly data plan. I had the master administrative access. And thanks to Julian's characteristic arrogance and sheer laziness, every single one of his core passwords was just the name of his childhood golden retriever, followed by his birth year. I logged into the server's back-end portal, navigated to the family sharing settings, and clicked on Julian's device synchronization, accessing cloud backups. The progress bar crawled across the screen like a snail. I stared at it, feeling like a specter eavesdropping on my own passing. This was the digital blueprint of my daughter and son-in-law, their photos, their contacts, their darkest secrets. The folders opened. I bypassed their catalog of Michelin-starred restaurant photos and the warning emails regarding their crashing cryptocurrency portfolio. I went straight for the message logs. I wanted to see exactly what they said to each other when the news cameras stopped rolling. I found the internal, encrypted chat thread between Harper and Julian. The timestamp was from yesterday, just a few hours after they had left me locked inside to face the heat. Harper, did you sweep the place? Julian, it's taken care of. I used alcohol wipes on the handle and the external locking bar. Not a single print left. Harper, good. Stick to the script. You were in the car making calls. I was in the bedroom doing yoga. He wandered out into the canyon on his own. Julian, I feel sick to my stomach. What if he went through hell in there? Harper, don't lose your nerve now, Julian. It was only a few hours of discomfort for him. What about us? We suffered for 3 long years waiting for that stubborn old man to finally step aside. Keep your focus on the money. I read those words again. We suffered for 3 long years. My generosity, the credit cards I paid off, my constant tolerance. To them, that was suffering. To them, living in a house I paid for and driving vehicles I bought was a form of torture, simply because they couldn't control the principle of my estate. I kept scrolling. I needed more. I needed the undeniable evidence that proved this wasn't just a crime of hatred, but a cold business transaction. I found a text exchange from this morning. The contact was labeled Brenda Realtor. Harper had sent her a link. I clicked it. It was a luxury estate in Montecito, California. Ocean views backed against the mountains, 8 bedrooms, listed at $25 million. Harper, Brenda, we want to submit an official offer. Brenda, the market there is incredibly competitive right now. The seller requires proof of funds. Can you show liquidity? Harper, we have a major liquidity event finalizing this week. The funds will clear within 7 days. Can you lock it down with a deposit for now? Brenda, how much for the deposit, Harper? Harper, $100,000. I can wire it tomorrow morning. The remainder is coming from an estate settlement. It is 100% guaranteed. I stared at the screen. A major liquidity event. That was me. I was the event. My passing was nothing more than an ATM transaction to them, the key to clearing their financial slate. They hadn't even waited for search and rescue to call off the dogs. They hadn't even waited for a fake memorial service. While they thought my body was still out there fading in the desert heat, they were already shopping for $25 million mansions. The timestamp on that text was 8 in the morning, 2 hours before they stood in front of the news cameras, crying about wanting me to come home. A dark laugh bubbled up in my chest, turning into a harsh cough that shook my ribs. Elias looked over. What did you find? I turned the laptop so he could see. They're buying a house, Elias, I whispered, my voice rough. $25 million. They're using my insurance payout as the down payment. Elias read through the text. his expression turning to stone. He racked the slide of his Glock, a sharp, lethal, metallic sound filling the room. "This is cold calculation," he said. "This is conspiracy to commit murder. We hand this over to federal agents right now. This is direct proof of motive." "No," I slammed the laptop shut. Elias stood up. "Arthur, this is crazy. You've got them trapped. You have the text. You have the cabin. Let the law take care of it." "The law takes too long," I said. "Sure, the law will arrest them, but then they'll get bail. They'll hire high-priced lawyers in expensive suits. They'll drag my name through court for 2 years. They'll argue these texts were just hypothetical planning. They'll say they were just preparing for the future." I forced myself up, making my trembling legs bear my weight. I walked to the window, staring out into the pitch-black woods. "I don't want to see them in a comfortable cell, Elias. Not yet. A cell is too safe. A cell has a bed and 3 scheduled meals a day." "Then what exactly do you want to do?" Elias asked. "I want them to feel the exact weight of that desperation," I said. "I want them to feel the heat. I want them to think they won everything. Let them move into that mansion. Let them spend the money. I want them to climb all the way to the top of the mountain. And right when they think they're untouchable, I'm going to kick the ladder out from under them." I turned to face him. "They called me a liquidity event, Elias. They reduced my entire life, my 35 years of service, my sweat, and my blood, to a simple wire transfer." I walked over to the table and picked up the cold bowl of oatmeal, taking a single bite. It tasted bitter, like the perfect fuel for a long hunt. "Keep an eye on those accounts," I told him. "Let the deposit go through. Let them wire the money for that Montecito estate." "But that's your money," Elias argued. "No," I replied, "that's the bait." I looked back at the television, where the news channel was replaying the broadcast. Julian was wiping his face. Harper was adjusting her dark glasses. "They wanted to put on a grand performance," I said, "so I'm going to give them a show. But the third act is going to have a twist they never saw coming." I lay back down on the cot. The burning pain in my back had settled into a dull ache, but my mind was completely clear. "Sleep well, Harper," I whispered into the dark. "Dream of your mansion, dream of your millions, because when you wake up, the real nightmare begins, and this time I'm the one sliding the bolt shut from the outside." The safe house was thick with the scent of old pine and gun oil, a combination that usually brought me a sense of calm. But tonight, it just felt like the staging ground for a reckoning. I sat at the rough wooden kitchen table, its surface covered in deep scratches from years of hunters cleaning their knives. My wounds had been cleaned and covered, hidden beneath a flannel shirt Elias had lent me, but the throbbing pain remained. The deep cuts on my back from the ventilation duct were a constant ache, a reminder that I was still made of flesh and bone. But the ache in my chest was something else entirely. It wasn't physical. It was the heavy, freezing weight of a reality I had spent 3 days trying to deny, but could no longer ignore. Elias walked out from the back room, carrying a heavy storage box full of documents. He looked completely exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, his tie loosened. He dropped the box onto the table with a heavy thud, making the coffee mugs rattle. "I pulled the financial data, Arthur," Elias said, pulling out a chair to sit down. "It's worse than we thought." I looked at the box. "How bad is it, Elias? Did Julian pull funds from his company's accounts?" "He tried to," Elias said, opening a folder. "He initiated transfers, starting small. 5,000 here, 10,000 there, routing it all through offshore cryptocurrency platforms. It's the classic behavior of a desperate gambler. But the banks caught it. The fraud alerts you set up years ago were top tier, Arthur. They froze the accounts before the large amounts could clear." I nodded slowly. I had put those security protocols in place a long time ago. I knew Julian was reckless and greedy, but I never imagined he would turn malicious. I thought he was just foolish. "So he's completely broke," I said. "That's why he chose this path. He needed the inheritance to cover up the fraud in his venture fund." Elias shook his head, pulling out a thick document bound in a blue cover and sliding it across the table toward me. "This isn't just about paying off his debts, Arthur. This is about a much bigger play. Look at this." I picked up the file. The header read, "Pinnacle Life Insurance, policy number 894221X." I frowned, staring at the paperwork. I didn't recognize the name of the company. My estate planning had always been handled by a trusted trust firm out of New York. I had a standard life insurance policy, just enough to cover the estate taxes and leave a solid donation to a few veterans' charities. But this document was completely different. I flipped open the first page. Insured, Arthur Pendleton. Beneficiary, Harper Pendleton. Base policy value, $15 million. I stared at the number, 15 million. I never authorized this, I said, my voice dropping. I haven't signed a new insurance policy in 10 years. Look at the signature page, Elias said, pointing to the very bottom of the last sheet. I flipped to the back. There it was in the signature block. Arthur J. Pendleton. The ink was a distinct blue. The sweep of the A was wide and the slant of the P was incredibly sharp. It looked exactly like my handwriting. Precise. Confident. But I knew for a fact I had never touched this piece of paper. I ran my thumb over the ink. It was a forgery, and not some clumsy attempt, like a kid faking a report card. This took countless hours of practice and study. Harper had spent days, maybe weeks, meticulously breaking down the way I write. She had transformed herself into me on paper, just to put a price tag on my life. What's the effective date? I asked. March 15th, Elias replied, 3 months ago. I closed my eyes as the memory surfaced. March 15th. I remembered that day perfectly. Harper and Julian had paid me a surprise visit out of the blue. She had been incredibly sweet, asking all about my blood pressure and checking to see if my will was up to date. I remember thinking she was finally growing up, finally understanding what family meant. In reality, she was just casing the joint. She was planning a hit. But it's 15 million, I said, opening my eyes. That's a fortune, Elias. But the way Julian and Harper burned through cash, that money wouldn't last them 5 years. Why risk everything for a few years of luxury? Keep reading, Elias said, his voice entirely cold. Look at section 14B, the double indemnity rider for accidental death. I quickly flipped back to the center of the document and found the clause. The legal jargon was dense, clearly designed to confuse anyone skim reading, but I had investigated enough contract fraud cases during my time with the marshals to see right through the word games. If the death of the insured is officially ruled an accident, including, but not limited to, drowning, falls, or extreme environmental exposure, the payout of this policy shall automatically double. It doubled, $30 million. A heavy silence settled over the room. The only sound was the desert wind howling through the pines outside, making the window panes rattle in their frames. I set the document down, my hands completely steady. Environmental exposure, I repeated quietly. Elias nodded. Like a severe case of heat stroke, Arthur. Like being accidentally locked inside a climate-controlled eco-cabin during a historic heat wave when the system just happens to fail. Or wandering off into a canyon because you lost your bearings. I stared at the wall, but I wasn't seeing the wood cabin anymore. I was seeing that modern glass dome. I saw its remote location, the exterior bolt welded onto the doorframe, the cut power lines. This wasn't just a regular crime. It was a highly organized business pitch. If she had poisoned my coffee, the medical examiner would have flagged it immediately. If she had used a weapon, it would have triggered a massive federal investigation. But an accident? A technical failure at a remote desert cabin? An old man giving in to the elements? That was a $30 million golden ticket. She didn't just want me gone, Elias, I said, the words slipping out as a low growl. She needed me to go through hell. She needed me to suffer from environmental exposure just to trigger the double payout. She locked me in that glass box because my life was worth twice as much to her if I faded away in agony instead of passing peacefully in my sleep. That's why they chose that specific canyon, Elias said, and that's why they waited for a historic heat wave. They were tracking the weather reports, Arthur. They were waiting for the hottest day of the year to cash you out. A deep chill settled in my chest, completely disconnected from the temperature of the room. It was the feeling of total disillusionment. For the last 3 days, a small part of me had held on to a tiny thread of hope. Maybe they just panicked. Maybe it was all Julian's idea and Harper was just going along with it. But this required serious paperwork. It required months of planning. It meant that for 3 whole months, every single time she looked me in the eye, she knew exactly how much cash my demise was worth. She viewed me as equity, I said. She was just waiting for the market value to hit its peak before cutting the cord. I stood up and walked over to the fireplace. The embers were dying out, turning to gray dust. I felt exactly like those ashes. The last bit of warmth I held for my daughter had vanished completely, leaving nothing but cold stone. Elias watched me closely. Arthur, we can take all of this straight to the district attorney. This is massive fraud, and it gives us the perfect motive. We can lock them down right now. No, I said. Elias sighed. Arthur, you're playing with fire. If they figure out you're alive before we make a move, she won't figure it out, I cut in. She's too arrogant. She thinks she's the smartest person in Silicon Valley. She thinks she just pulled off the perfect crime. I turned back to the table and picked up the insurance policy. $30 million. That was the number. That was the exact value of my entire existence in her eyes. I looked at Elias. Let her file the claim. Elias blinked in surprise. What? Let her file the claim, I repeated. Let her submit my death certificate. Let her sign her name to the affidavit swearing this was a tragic accident. Let her reach all the way out for that $30 million. But why, Arthur? Because without a body, an attempted murder charge can get messy in court, I explained. A top-tier defense attorney paid with millions of dollars can argue she simply forgot to unlock the door, or that she panicked in the desert and fled. She might get a light sentence for negligence and walk free in a couple of years. I slammed the policy down onto the table. But wire and mail fraud on a $30 million federal level? That's a different story. That's a mandatory 20-year minimum with no chance of early release. And if the decedent happens to walk right into the room and stand right behind her the moment she signs that claim, a smile crossed my face, though it never reached my eyes. It was the look of a predator that had just caught a scent in the water. Then I own her future, Elias. I hold her freedom in my hands. I control every breath she takes for the rest of her life. Elias looked at the document, then back at me. He recognized the shift. The forgiving father was gone, and the relentless federal lawman was fully back in control. You're going to let her dig her own grave? Elias asked quietly. I'm going to hand her the shovel myself, I said. I sat back down, pulling the laptop closer. When is the memorial service scheduled? This Saturday, Elias said, at a high-end country club in Scottsdale. She's calling it a celebration of life. She's invited all your old colleagues, the local media, and her entire network of investors. Perfect, I said. Saturday. I looked at the calendar on the screen. 3 days. 3 days to let them sweat. 3 days to let them spend money they don't actually have. 3 days to let them think they're sitting on top of the world. I need you to place a call to this insurance provider, Elias. Use your old connections in the industry. Tell them that as a representative of the family estate, you want this claim expedited. Tell them the family is absolutely devastated and needs the funds cleared immediately to take care of the estate arrangements. Elias hesitated. You want to help her get the money? I want her to see it, I said. I want her to taste it. I want her completely convinced that she succeeded. Because the higher you climb, the harder you hit the ground. I touched the healing burn on my forearm. The marks would stay with me forever, even after they closed up. She valued me at $30 million, I whispered, closing the laptop lid. She's about to find out that cross paths with Arthur Pendleton carries a price she can never afford to pay. Get some rest, Elias, I said. We have a major event to prepare for on Saturday, and it's definitely not going to be my funeral. I sat in the dim light of the safe house, the rugged field laptop open right in front of me. On that small 14-inch screen, I was watching my own memorial service stream live. It is a truly surreal experience to watch the world keep spinning without you. It makes you feel like a ghost, just without the ability to pass through walls. I was pinned to that wooden chair by the healing cuts on my back and the cold focus in my chest. How does the story end? Does Arthur show up at the memorial service to confront them? It had been 7 days since I broke out of the desert, 7 days of absolute silence. The search and rescue teams had officially called off their operations at sunset yesterday. In the eyes of the law, Arthur Pendleton was now a statistic, a tragedy, a cautionary tale about an old man who overestimated his ability to handle the extreme weather. But on the screen in front of me, reality looked a hell of a lot uglier. 2 hours ago, I tapped into the security feed of that high-end country club in Scottsdale. It was a walk in the park for me. The security footage showed that the setup on the lawn didn't look like a memorial service at all. It looked like a lavish celebration. The grass was manicured like a pool table. Harper hadn't spared a single expense. Massive white silk tents were set up across the grounds to block out the brutal Arizona sun. The exact same sun she tried to use as a weapon to end my life was now being blocked by expensive fabric to protect her delicate guests. Servers in clean white uniforms carried silver trays through the crowd. I zoomed in on the feed. Champagne, Dom Perignon. They were serving top-tier champagne at a lawman's memorial. My stomach turned. Champagne. Throughout my whole life, I only drank cold Budweiser and bourbon. Anyone who actually knew me knew that. If this memorial were really about honoring me, they'd be flipping ribs on a grill and cracking open beers. But this wasn't for me. This was entirely about building her own image. I scanned the crowd, recognizing quite a few faces. There were some of my old bosses from the Marshal Service, looking solemn, though one of them checked his watch every 30 seconds. There was Brenda, the high-end realtor, talking to a group of tech investors with a smile that stretched from ear to ear. She was probably already calculating the commission she'd make when Harper closed on that $25 million estate. Then there were Harper and Julian's so-called friends, the kind of people who raise money in Silicon Valley using flashy presentations, individuals who had never done a single day of real labor in their lives, but wore custom suits worth tens of thousands of dollars. They were drinking champagne paid for with my life, eating expensive caviar, and laughing. Through the hidden microphones, I could catch pieces of their conversations. "It's just such a shame," a woman in a massive sun hat said. "But at least he passed away doing what he loved, taking in the beautiful scenery. There's a certain poetry to that." I passed away in a sealed metal box, I thought, glaring at the screen. Then the camera angle shifted as the French double doors of the main club building swung open. Harper and Julian walked out. I felt the blood in my veins turn to pure ice. Julian was wearing a perfectly tailored black Tom Ford suit, playing the role of the grieving son-in-law down to a science. He kept his head down slightly, holding a pristine white handkerchief. He walked with heavy, measured steps, nodding and shaking hands to accept the condolences. He looked like he was carrying the weight of the world, but I knew the only thing running through his mind was the incoming wire transfer. But it was Harper who made my breath catch in my throat. She wore a custom black dress, incredibly elegant and low-key, clearly a brand-new, top-tier piece of designer clothing. But it wasn't the dress that made my hands shake. It was the necklace around her neck. It was a diamond and sapphire pendant. It caught the Arizona sun, glittering so intensely that the shine cut right through the grainy pixels of the security feed. I knew that necklace by heart. I bought it back in 1995. I saved every penny of my marshal's salary for 3 long years, eating countless meals of canned beans just to afford it. It was a 10th anniversary gift for my wife, Sarah. When I put it around Sarah's neck, she cried. She wore it every single Sunday to church. She wore it to Harper's college graduation. In the family portrait hanging above the fireplace, she was wearing it. When Sarah passed away 10 years ago, before the funeral home staff arrived, I personally took that necklace off her neck. I cleaned it, wrapped it in velvet, and locked it away in a highly secure hidden wall, safe in my bedroom. A safe where only I knew the combination. Or at least, I thought I was the only one. Harper had found it. She broke into the last private sanctuary of my life, digging through the belongings of the woman who had loved her, and stole the one thing I held sacred. She wasn't just wearing a piece of jewelry, she was wearing my heart, and she had it on display at a party paid for by my attempted demise. I watched her absent-mindedly touch the pendant while talking to an insurance claims investigator. Whatever the man said made her let out a light laugh. Then she touched the diamonds again as if confirming they were real, confirming she was now a multimillionaire, confirming she had won. "You crossed the line, Harper," My low growl echoed in the quiet cabin. You took the one thing you shouldn't have, and you burned every bridge behind you. Elias stepped up behind me, placing a hand on my shoulder. He looked at the screen, his eyes landing on the necklace. That belonged to Sarah, didn't it? He asked softly. I nodded, the fury in my throat too thick to let me speak. That's theft, Arthur, Elias said. We can add that to the charges. It's desecration, I said through grit teeth. She's wearing her mother's memory like a trophy. I watched the ceremony begin. Julian walked up to the podium set up near the pool. He tapped the microphone, the sharp feedback making the guests in the front row wince. Thank you all for coming today. Julian's voice had a perfect tremor, sounding deeply emotional. We're gathered here to celebrate the life of Arthur Pendleton, my father-in-law, a true hero, a dedicated lawman who stood for justice. He paused, effortlessly wiping away a tear that wasn't actually there. My father-in-law was a man of few words, Julian continued. He was tough. Sometimes he was demanding of us. But I know he loved us, and I know he would want us to keep moving forward. He wouldn't want us stuck in grief. He would want us to live our lives, to build and to secure the legacy he left behind. Secure the legacy. That was the code phrase for cashing the checks. I listened to him spin his web of lies, rewriting history for the crowd. He spoke about fishing trips we never took and advice I never gave him. He painted a picture of a close family bond, all to justify the tens of millions he thought he was about to inherit. And the crowd swallowed it whole. Heads nodded in agreement, a soft murmur of consensus passing through the guests. To them, this was the picture of a family crushed by grief. But to me, looking through that screen, they were just two predators in mourning clothes. Then the insurance claims investigator stepped up. He was a shorter man carrying a leather briefcase, shaking Julian's hand with significant force. I watched him hand Harper a blue folder. I knew exactly what was inside, the expedited claims paperwork and the final affidavit to legally declare my passing an accident. Harper took the folder, holding it tightly against her chest like a relic. She didn't open it right away, she just held onto it with a desperate grip. I turned up the audio feed on the monitor, but the background noise of the crowd was too loud. I couldn't hear the words, but I could read Harper's lips clearly as she turned to Julian. Sign it tonight, she mouthed silently. I leaned back in the chair. They were entirely too confident. They truly believed the game was over, that the whistle had blown, and all that was left was to stand on the podium and collect their prize. I turned my head toward Elias. Is the uniform ready? I asked. Elias nodded. In the bedroom. Had it dry cleaned, and I polished the brass buttons myself. I stood up. My legs were still a bit stiff, but the weakness had vanished entirely. The oatmeal and a few days of rest had done their job, and the adrenaline carried me the rest of the way. I walked into the bedroom. Hanging on the back of the door was my full-dress uniform from my time as a senior deputy marshal. It had been 5 years since I last put it on. The deep blue fabric was perfectly pressed, the gold braiding on the cuffs sharp, and the service ribbons across the chest told a story of survival these Silicon Valley types could never comprehend. This wasn't just clothing, it was armor. I stripped off the flannel shirt, glancing at the white bandages covering the deep abrasions and burns across my chest and back. I pulled on the uniform trousers. The waist was loose now. I had lost a considerable amount of weight in that desert trap, so I cinched the duty belt tight. I put on the shirt, fastening the buttons one by one. One button for discipline, one for duty, one for honor. I tied the tie in a perfect Windsor knot. Muscle memory took over automatically. Even with my hands raw and cut, they knew exactly what to do. I slipped on the uniform jacket, the familiar weight instantly making my posture straighten. I looked into the mirror. The man staring back wasn't a victim from an eco cabin. He wasn't an old man who needed a nap. He was the lawman who spent 3 decades tracking down the most dangerous fugitives in the country. I placed my wide-brimmed gray Stetson hat firmly on my head, adjusting it perfectly parallel to my brow. I picked up my walking cane, a heavy black wood piece with a solid sterling silver handle. I didn't actually need it to walk anymore, but today it was the perfect prop. It was part of the theater. I walked back into the main room. Elias was waiting, looking me up and down before letting out a sharp, cold smile. You look like you're about to run a court-martial, Arthur, he said. I am, I replied. I took one final look at the screen. Julian was raising a glass of champagne. Harper was laughing, her fingers running over the stolen necklace. Enjoy that drink, girl, I thought silently. It's the last taste of luxury you'll ever have. Elias grabbed the truck keys. The Suburban is ready, Arthur. It's a 40-minute drive to the country club. Let's move. We stepped out of the cabin, walking right into the bright afternoon sun. I wasn't dead. I wasn't lost. I was coming home, and I was bringing the storm with me. The drive to my own memorial service was entirely quiet. Elias kept his hands steady on the wheel of the black SUV. Those hands were used to transporting heavy targets, not driving a ghost back from the grave. I sat in the passenger seat, watching the cacti and red rocks blur past the window. I knew every canyon and ridge of this land. Today it felt like the setting for a final reckoning. We turned into the main entrance of the country club. The gates were wide open. Harper wanted the world to see her grief so that when the $30 million check cleared, nobody would think to question it. The lawn was packed with high-end vehicles, Bentleys, custom Teslas, and top-tier electric SUVs. It looked like a parking lot for vultures. As we neared the main gathering, a young security guard in an ill-fitting uniform raised his hand for us to stop. I rolled down the window. The guard took one look at my face, and his eyes went wide. His jaw literally dropped. He stumbled backward, dropping his radio onto the gravel with a sharp clatter. Mr. Pendleton? He stammered, his voice cracking in absolute shock. But they said you were... Raise the gate, son, I said softly. My voice carried the calm authority of a man who used to run these roads. He didn't even try to argue. He scrambled over to the control box, and the heavy metal barrier slowly swung upward. We drove in smoothly. Up ahead, the party on the back lawn came into full view. It was incredibly lavish, with white silk tents moving gently in the breeze. A string quartet was playing a somber classical piece. Near the pool stood a massive portrait of me from 10 years ago, taken when I received a presidential commendation. In the photo, I was smiling. But there was no smile on my face today. Elias drove the Suburban right up to the edge of the stone patio before stepping on the brakes, the tires crunching loudly against the gravel. The sharp, mechanical disruption cut right through the soft music. Heads turned immediately, people frowning at the rude intrusion. They likely assumed it was a late caterer or a careless delivery driver. They certainly didn't expect a dead man to step out. I opened the door and stood up. Dressed in my full-dress uniform, the deep blue fabric looked heavy and imposing against the sea of light linen suits. The medals on my chest caught the afternoon light. I adjusted the brim of my Stetson, keeping my gaze steady. I gripped the silver handle of my cane firmly. I didn't say a single word. I just stood there. The silence started at the back of the crowd and spread forward like a wave. The murmurs vanished. The clinking of glasses stopped completely. The cellist in the quartet caught sight of me, drawing a harsh, screeching note from the strings, before the music died out entirely. One by one they turned, gasped, and stared. It was an absolute stillness, the kind of heavy quiet you only experience right before a storm hits. I scanned the faces. I saw my old supervisor, his mouth open as a piece of catering food slipped right from his fingers onto the rug. I saw Brenda, the realtor, staring with wide eyes. And then I saw them. Julian was standing at the podium by the pool, still clutching the notes of the speech he was halfway through delivering. He had been right in the middle of recalling my unyielding spirit. He froze completely, every drop of color draining from his face until he looked like old ash. He gripped the edges of the wooden stand so hard his knuckles turned white. He wasn't looking at a returning family member, he was looking at his own undoing. And Harper was right there in the front row, holding a glass of Dom Perignon, dressed in her elegant black outfit. Around her neck was my wife's necklace, the diamonds shining brightly in the sun. She saw me. Even through her heavy designer glasses, I felt her gaze lock directly onto my face. Her hand began to tremble. First a slight twitch, then a violent shake. The crystal glass slipped right from her fingers. It hit the stone patio with a sharp smash, sounding like a gunshot in the dead silence. Champagne splashed all over the hem of her expensive dress, but she didn't even blink. She kept her eyes glued to me, her lips moving silently to form a single word. Ghost. I started walking forward. Click, step, click, step. The sound of my cane hitting the stone patio was the only noise left in the world. The crowd parted down the middle like the Red Sea, people scrambling backward out of my way, knocking over chairs and spilling drinks. They looked at me with a mixture of intense shock and awe. I was thin, the skin on my face peeling from the intense sunburn, my eyes sunken and red. I truly looked like I had just returned from the grave. In a way, I had. I walked straight down the center aisle, looking neither left nor right, keeping my focus locked entirely on the stage, on the daughter and son-in-law who had locked me inside a human oven. Julian tried to speak, his mouth opening and closing without producing a sound. He looked like a fish gasping for air on a boat deck. He took a panicked step back, knocking into the microphone stand. The speakers let out a sharp, high-pitched squeal that made the guests cover their ears. I reached the steps of the stage and walked up slowly. 1, 2, 3. I stood right next to him. I could literally smell the panic on him, a sharp, sour scent cutting through his expensive cologne. He was shaking so violently that the entire podium was vibrating with him. "Dad," he managed to whisper, his voice barely audible. I looked at him, staring deep into his eyes. I saw total terror, guilt, and his mind racing to put together a lie that could explain this away. I reached out and placed a heavy hand firmly on his shoulder. He flinched hard, as if my hand were made of hot iron. He expected me to lash out, to raise my voice right there in public, but I didn't. I just smiled, the look of a wolf staring down a cornered target. I leaned in toward the microphone. My voice was incredibly rough, permanently raspy from the hot sand and the 120-degree air, but it was loud enough to echo off the walls of the country club. "Sorry to cut the speeches short, everyone," I said calmly. The crowd stared, nobody daring to take a breath. I turned back to Julian, my grip tightening on his shoulder just enough to remind him that I was entirely real, and I wasn't going anywhere. I patted his shoulder gently. "Next time, Julian," I said, keeping my tone perfectly conversational, as I leaned in close, making sure only the microphone captured my venomous whisper. "If you're going to use extreme heat as a weapon, make sure the smart system you choose doesn't keep a backdoor log of the overrides." The words hung in the air, simple, lethal. To the guests on the lawn, it probably sounded like an inside joke, maybe some dark humor from an old lawman, but to Julian it was an immediate sentence. It was direct confirmation that I hadn't just survived. I knew everything. I knew about the cabin. I knew about the system override. I knew it all. The last trace of color vanished from his face. A strange choking sound caught in his throat. He looked down toward the crowd in sheer panic, searching for Harper. But Harper was gone. She had already vanished from the front row, leaving behind nothing but a puddle of champagne and broken crystal. I pulled the microphone from its stand. "Enjoy yourselves, everyone," I addressed the stunned crowd. "I believe there's an open bar over there, and I believe my son-in-law was just about to tell you all about my legacy." I shoved the microphone into Julian's hands. "Go ahead, son. Finish your speech. Tell them how much you missed me." Julian held the microphone, his hand shaking so violently he almost dropped it twice. He looked desperately at the crowd, then back at me. I stood there, leaning on my cane in my full dress uniform, waiting. He couldn't do it. The words wouldn't come. The moment I walked through those gates, his entire web of lies fell apart. He dropped the microphone, letting it hit the wooden floorboards with a dull thud, and ran. He scrambled down the stage steps, pushing past the insurance investigator and tripping over a bundle of cables. He bolted toward the main club building like a madman, looking for a place to hide, looking for Harper, looking for an exit that didn't exist. I watched him run without a hint of emotion. Then I turned back to the crowd. "It seems my son-in-law is a bit overwhelmed," I said calmly. I walked over to the insurance investigator, who was still tightly clutching the blue folder containing the $30 million claim paperwork. "I believe that belongs to me," I said, pointing to the file. The man handed it over, his hands trembling. Mr. Pendleton, we were notified that the reports of my passing have been greatly exaggerated," I said, taking the folder. I flipped it open, catching sight of Harper's signature on the claim form and the fraudulent, accidental death affidavit. Evidence. I snapped the folder shut and tucked it under my arm, turning back to the terrified guests. "The party's over," I said sharply. "Get out of my sight." I didn't wait for them to move. I turned around and walked directly toward the main building, following the trail of sheer panic my son-in-law had left behind. A dead man was walking, and the real reckoning was just beginning. The dead silence over the country club lawn didn't last long. It shattered instantly like a dropped mirror. The shockwave of my sudden appearance broke the spell, and the air immediately filled with panicked whispers and sharp gasps. The crowd of vultures in linen and silk, who had come to toast my passing, scrambled backward as if trying to avoid a plague. They stared at my uniform, at the raw sunburns peeling across my skin, and at the silver-handled cane in my grip. Julian was backed into the far corner of the club patio, looking completely small, like a child waiting for a harsh reprimand. His face was a mask of cold sweat and pale shock. His mouth opened and closed as he desperately searched for a script, trying to recall the rehearsed lines he and Harper had prepared for this day. But the script didn't account for a survivor walking out of the desert. There was no plan B. "Dad," he stammered, his voice thin and strained. "Dad, I can't believe it." He took a few uneven steps forward, nearly tripping over his expensive leather loafers, before stopping 5 feet away. He didn't dare touch me. He looked terrified that if he reached out, his hand would pass right through me, or worse, that I would grab him by the throat and pull him down into the dirt. "We thought you were gone," Julian choked out, tears streaming down his face, tears of absolute terror, not relief. "We looked everywhere for you. I drove through the canyons for hours. I screamed your name until my throat bled. I thought you fell off a ridge. I thought I lost you forever." He was spinning a desperate, transparent web of lies, trying to rewrite history on the spot, hoping that if he said it loud enough, it would somehow become real. I watched him sweat, his eyes darting toward the edge of the property, looking for an escape route. I gave him the cold, unblinking look of a marshal staring down a cornered suspect. "You didn't look everywhere, son," I said, keeping my voice low enough for just him to hear. "You didn't look in the crawl space." Julian flinched hard, his eyes widening. In that single second, he knew that I remembered everything: the locked bolt, the cut power, the extreme heat, the suffocating dark. Right as he looked ready to collapse, I caught a sudden movement out of the corner of my eye. Harper. She was much faster than him, much sharper. She realized Julian was sinking, and that if she didn't move fast, he would drag her down with him. She pushed past the shattered glass on the stone patio. Instead of running away, she charged straight toward me, immediately launching into a performance worthy of a grand stage. She threw her hands over her mouth, letting out a dramatic cry of pure joy. "Oh my God!" she screamed. "Oh, thank God, it's a miracle!" She threw herself at me, wrapping her arms tightly around my neck and burying her face against the shoulder of my dress uniform. "Dad!" she sobbed loudly, making sure every officer and camera nearby could hear her. "You're alive. We prayed every single night, every night." I stood there stiff as iron, refusing to wrap my arms around her. I just let her hang on to me. I could feel her entire body shaking against mine, but it wasn't the tremor of relief. It was the tense vibration of a predator caught in a trap. She smelled of luxury perfume mixed with the sharp scent of fear. But beneath it all, I smelled pure greed, a rotten soul. I leaned my head down, bringing my lips close to her ear, ensuring our conversation stayed completely private. "Get off me, Harper," I whispered, my voice rough like grinding stones. She froze instantly but didn't let go, forcing herself to maintain the act. "I can smell it on you," I murmured. "Smell what?" she hissed back near my collar, her voice sharp with rising panic. "The insurance money," I said. "I can smell the $30 million you already started spending. I can smell the $25 million house in Montecito. I can smell the absolute betrayal." She pulled back violently, staring at me with wide, terrified eyes. Through the tears, she finally saw the hunter in front of her, the man who had torn through cold iron and concrete just to stand over her and call the check. She stepped back, wiping her face quickly, and turned to the gathering crowd. "He's in shock," she announced loudly, her voice trembling with deceit. He's completely disoriented. We need to get him inside. We need a doctor." That was the cue for the authorities to step in. Two local officers detailed to the high-profile service quickly walked over. One of them was Sheriff Carter, an old colleague from my days on a joint task force. A good man, honest, and completely by the book. "Mr. Pendleton," Sheriff Carter said, touching the brim of his hat. "Sir, in all my years, I've never seen anything like this." We had already transitioned this operation to a recovery effort, not a rescue. I looked at Carter, then turned my gaze to Julian and Harper. They were both holding their breath, waiting for the accusation. They were waiting for me to point a finger and say, "They did this. They locked me in and faked a failure. Take them in." If I did that, the game would end too quickly. They'd be arrested and out on bail within hours. They'd hire a team of expensive lawyers who would drag the case out for years, claiming I was suffering from dementia or severe trauma, insisting it was all just an unfortunate accident. No, that was too easy on them. I wanted their complete ruin, and to get that, I had to make them feel safe. I had to let them think they got away with it. I needed to give them enough rope to tie their own knots. I looked at Carter and put on a tired, exhausted smile, letting my shoulders slump slightly as I played the part of a broken-down veteran. "It was entirely my own fault, Sheriff," I sighed heavily. Julian's head snapped up. Harper froze in place. "Your fault, sir?" Carter asked, pulling out his notepad. "Yeah," I sighed heavily, shaking my head. "I'm just a stubborn old fool, Carter. I had one too many whiskeys that morning. Way too many." The air inside the cabin felt suffocating, so I stepped outside to clear my head. The automated security system must have engaged and locked the door behind me. I was completely disoriented in the heat, lost my footing, and rolled down a steep wash. By the time I came to, I was wedged deep in a slot canyon. I paused for effect, turning my gaze directly onto Julian. I watched the color start to flood back into his pale cheeks. I saw a spark of hope ignite in his desperate eyes. "I wandered lost in those canyons for days," I continued, weaving the lie effortlessly. "Hit my head pretty hard. I was completely confused. For a couple of days, I didn't even know my own name. I was surviving on nothing but cactus pulp just to get some moisture, desperately trying to remember who I was. It was a ridiculous story, the kind of trash plot you'd read in a terrible dime novel mystery. But it was exactly the kind of simple narrative the local police wanted to hear. It meant they could close the file without dealing with a massive mountain of criminal paperwork. And it was exactly the kind of story Julian and Harper were dying to hear, because it meant they weren't going to federal prison today. "Temporary amnesia?" Carter asked, writing it down rapidly. "Exactly," I said, tapping my temple. It wasn't until this morning that everything clicked back into place. I managed to hike my way out to the highway, hitched a ride with a passing truck, and got back just in time to catch my own eulogy. Sheriff Carter snapped his notepad shut and let out a light chuckle. "Well, sir, I'm just glad you're back in one piece. You gave your family a hell of a scare." He turned to look at Julian. "You're a lucky man, son. Not everyone gets a second chance to have a dead father walk back through the door." Julian nodded frantically, his face washing over with relief. "Yes, absolutely. Thank God. Like I said, it was just a terrible accident." He looked at me with a look of counterfeit gratitude. He genuinely believed I was spinning this yarn to protect him because he was family. He might have even convinced himself that I was just an old, confused man who didn't fully comprehend the situation. He thought he had just won the lottery. He had absolutely no idea that I had just quietly closed the door to the trap behind him. I turned to face the remaining guests who were still standing around in stunned silence. "The show's over," I said, my voice cutting through the air like a whip. "Go home. Take your expensive champagne and your fake sympathy and get out of my sight." I didn't wait around to watch them leave. I turned around and walked directly into the club's private VIP lounge. Harper and Julian followed immediately behind me like two stray dogs eager to please. They were desperate to stay on my good side now, eager to protect the perfect accident narrative we had just established. "Dad, let me help you," Julian said, reaching out an arm to steady me. "Don't touch me," I snapped coldly. He flinched, pulling his hand back as if he'd been burned. I walked into the lounge, A room lined with expensive Persian rugs and plush leather sofas, where high-stakes business deals were usually finalized. The air smelled of expensive cigars. I turned around to face them as they stood nervously by the doorway. They looked exhausted, completely shaken, but beneath it all, there was a visible sense of relief mixed with utter confusion. "Dad," Julian's voice trembled. We we are so incredibly sorry. We had no idea. If we had known you were still out there." "Save it, Julian," I said, leaning heavily on my silver cane. I walked over to the side table next to the fireplace and picked up the heavy brass urn they had set out, the one originally intended to hold my ashes. "What's this?" I asked. That was for you," Harper whispered, her eyes darting away. "Since the recovery teams hadn't found you, we were going to place your old pocket watch inside and set up a memorial stone." I weighed the heavy brass urn in my hands. It was completely empty, just like their souls. I threw it hard at Julian. He scrambled clumsily to catch it, the metal hitting his chest with a heavy thud. "Keep it," I told him. "You're going to need it down the road." I turned my attention to Harper, my eyes locking onto the pendant around her neck. "That is an incredibly beautiful piece of jewelry, Harper," I said, my voice deadpan. She flinched, her hand automatically flying up to shield her throat. "Oh, this. I just wanted to feel close to you and Mom. I found it in the safe. I hoped you wouldn't mind." "Take it off," I commanded. My voice wasn't loud, but it carried an absolute weight that left no room for argument. She froze. "But Dad—" "Take it off!" Her fingers shook violently as she fumbled with the clasp, her long acrylic nails getting in the way as she struggled with it for a tense moment. Finally, the latch gave way, and she handed the necklace over. I took it from her hand and slid it deep into my uniform pocket. I looked at both of them. "I'm exhausted," I said. "I'm going home. I want this venue completely cleared out in 10 minutes. And as for you two, you're staying in the guest rooms behind the main house tonight." "The guest rooms?" Julian asked, caught off guard. "But that's our home." "Not tonight, it isn't," I said. "Tonight, I want absolute peace and quiet." I turned and walked toward the door. "Dad!" Harper called out, desperation bleeding into her voice. "What happens now? Are we okay?" I paused at the threshold, looking back over my shoulder at them. They looked incredibly pathetic, standing there so small in their expensive clothes. I let that sharp, predator smile slip across my face one more time. "We're family, Harper," I said softly. "And family stays together through the heat, don't they?" I didn't wait for a response. I stepped out into the hallway, the only sound trailing behind me being the sharp click of my cane hitting the tile floor. Behind me, I heard them both let out a long, heavy breath of relief. I heard the quiet murmurs of their hurried whispers begin. They were unwinding. They genuinely believed the worst of the storm had passed. They had absolutely no idea that I was the storm, and I had just made landfall. The final luxury car crunched down the gravel driveway, leaving my estate behind. The dust they kicked up hung in the dry, hot Arizona twilight like a dirty curtain. I stood on the porch of the home I bought with 35 years of sweat and blood in the Marshal Service, watching the taillights of the vultures fade into the distance. They had gotten their entertainment. Now they were retreating to their air-conditioned luxury condos, leaving me alone with the two rats trapped inside my house. The house was incredibly quiet now, a heavy, suffocating silence that pressed hard against your eardrums. I turned, stepped back inside, and closed the heavy oak front door behind me. I didn't bother using the electronic keypad. I intentionally turned the manual brass deadbolt. Click. I wanted them to hear the heavy metal mechanism sliding into place. I wanted that distinct sound to trigger the deepest, most primitive memory of fear they possessed. The memory of that steel locking bar sliding shut over the eco-cabin door, sealing my fate. Julian and Harper were sitting in the spacious, sunken living room, looking exactly like refugees hiding out in their own home. Julian had already ripped his tie off, his forehead slick with sweat. Harper was frantically fanning herself with a program from the memorial service, her expensive makeup starting to run and smear under the rising heat. I walked right past them without saying a single word. I headed straight for the central thermostat console in the main hallway, a top-tier smart home system I had installed a few years back. I typed in the master override code, a sequence known only to me. I watched the digital display blink. Current temperature 72 degrees. I turned the dial 85, 90, 95, 100. I heard the heavy central air compressor let out a low, shuddering groan outside before cutting off completely. The silence that followed was absolute and oppressive. "Dad?" Julian's voice carried a distinct tremor as he walked out to the hall. "What are you doing? Why did the AC just cut out?" I leaned on my cane, looking at him calmly. "It broke?" I said flatly. My voice didn't carry a single hint of emotion, mirroring the exact phrasing of the log from the eco cabin. "Systems fail, son, especially when you push them past their limits." "But it's still 95 degrees outside," Harper snapped, standing up quickly from the couch. "We can't stay in a sealed house without air conditioning. It's dangerous." "Dangerous?" I repeated the word slowly, watching the tiny beads of sweat already forming on her upper lip. "Yes, Harper, high heat is incredibly dangerous. It sneaks up on you. It dries out your lungs. It boils your thoughts. But we're family, right? We handle the heat together." I walked over to the massive floor-to-ceiling panoramic windows that offered a beautiful view of the Red Rock canyons. I reached up and pulled the heavy blackout velvet curtains shut, blocking out the last of the twilight, cutting off the view completely. "We need to keep the sun out," I said. "Otherwise this place turns into an oven." I moved from one window to the next, shutting them tightly and engaging the heavy manual locks. I slid the keys out of the mechanisms and dropped them straight into my pocket. Julian watched me with wide, terrified eyes. He knew. In the deepest, most primitive part of his brain, he knew exactly what was happening. I was recreating the trap. I was turning my luxury estate into the very eco-cabin they left me in. I walked into the kitchen. It was dinner time. On a night this hot, a normal family would order takeout or eat a cold salad. But we weren't a normal family. I opened the pantry and pulled out the heaviest cast-iron Dutch oven I owned. I filled it to the brim with water, placed it onto the professional gas range, and turned all 6 burners up to high. The blue flames roared to life, immediately pumping waves of intense heat into the already suffocating room. "What are you cooking?" Julian asked, standing at the kitchen threshold, wiping sweat from his brow with his sleeve. "Chili," I said, using the flat of my knife to rhythmically smash cloves of garlic against the cutting board. Thump, thump, thump. An old border recipe I picked up down south. Heavy spice. It needs to simmer with the lid on for at least 3 hours. "Chili?" Harper shrieked, her voice cracking in utter disbelief. "Are you out of your mind, Arthur? It's already like a sauna in here. We need ice water. We need a salad." I ignored her completely. I tossed the chopped habanero peppers straight into the pot. I poured in a heavy amount of chili oil and dark spices. Thick, pungent steam rolled up from the stove, rapidly filling the kitchen with a heavy, stinging mist that clung to the skin and burned the eyes. I kept cooking, moving around the kitchen like a man possessed. I left the exhaust fan turned off, letting the heat build. I let the humidity rise until the glass kitchen windows were entirely fogged over with heavy condensation. "Sit down," I ordered, pointing my wooden spoon toward the dining table. They sat. They didn't dare resist. The sheer weight of having this returning ghost standing over them in their own home was too much to fight. I ladled the boiling, deep red chili into heavy ceramic bowls and slammed them down right in front of them. The rising heat hit their faces, making them wince and pull back. "Eat," I said. "Dad, I can't," Julian whispered, his voice shaking. "I feel sick to my stomach." "Eat the food," I roared, slamming my fist down so hard the table rattled. "You wanted to break bread with your old man, didn't you? You wanted to fix this family? Well, this is family time. Eat?" I scooped up a heavy spoonful of the boiling chili and shoved it right into my mouth without blinking. I let it burn my throat. The temperature of the food was nothing compared to the absolute fire burning inside my chest. They ate. They forced the hot, spicy meat down their throats. The burning spice combined with the oppressive room temperature sent tears streaming down their faces. Sweat poured off Julian's forehead, dripping straight into his bowl. Harper's expensive silk shirt was completely ruined. soaked through and sticking to her skin like a second layer of sweat. "It's getting pretty warm in here, isn't it?" I asked softly, watching them struggle. "Feels like the oxygen is running low. Feels like the walls are closing in on you." Julian dropped his spoon, the metal clattering loudly against the table. "Stop it!" he cried out, pushing his chair back as he stood up, completely breaking down. "Stop it, Dad! I know what you're doing." "What am I doing, son?" I blinked, putting on a perfectly innocent look. You're punishing us," Julian stammered, his chest heaving. "This heat, the locked windows, you're trying to make us feel... Feel what?" I leaned forward. "Trapped. Like there's no way out, and nobody is coming to save you. Like you're going to fade away in a closed box." Julian was hyperventilating now, completely gripped by a massive panic attack. I... I need to get out," he gasped, his eyes darting around. "I need air." He bolted toward the kitchen back door and slammed his weight against the handle. Locked tight, he shook the frame frantically. "Dad, open the door!" I sat back in my chair, calmly taking another bite of my chili. "The keys might be in the study," I said casually. "Or maybe out in the garage. I can't quite recall. My memory. It comes and goes these days." Julian slid down the kitchen door, burying his face in his hands as he wept. The oppressive heat was breaking his resolve, exactly the way it had tried to break mine in the canyon. Harper stood up next. She wasn't crying. She was absolutely furious. She gave Julian a look of pure disgust as he whimpered on the floor, then turned her gaze to me, her eyes filled with nothing but cold malice. "You're a sick old man, Arthur," she spit out through grit teeth. I just smiled. "You're sweating, Harper. It's ruining your expensive makeup." As night fell, the environment inside the house only grew more intense. I didn't let them leave. I informed them that the estate's automated security protocols had malfunctioned, locking down the perimeter. I warned them that forcing any door would immediately dispatch the local authorities and federal agents. Given the quiet mentions of fraud investigations I had brought up at the country club, they were far too terrified of the police to risk running. I escorted them up to the master bedroom on the second floor, the very room they had tried to claim as their own. I had cut the power to the upper floor's climate control as well. Hot air rises. The temperature upstairs was easily 10 degrees warmer than the kitchen. I stayed downstairs in my study, where a compact, hidden AC unit kept the air perfectly cool and comfortable. I kept my eyes on them through the security monitors. Julian couldn't rest. He tossed and turned on the high-end sheets, kicking the blankets off, only to nervously pull them back over himself a minute later. He was slipping into a mild state of delirium, muttering incoherently in his sleep. I turned up the audio feed. "The door," he mumbled, his voice thick with panic. "Open the door. It's too hot. Dad, I'm sorry." He was replaying the eco cabin. He was dreaming about the end they had planned for me. Harper, however, was wide awake. She sat on the edge of the mattress, staring directly at the wall. She wasn't sweating. She was calculating. She watched Julian struggle in his nightmare with a completely detached, cold expression, making no effort to comfort him. She looked at him like a damaged piece of equipment that had outlived its usefulness. She stood up, walked into the adjoining bathroom, and splashed cold water on her face. She stared deep into her own reflection. I zoomed the camera in closer, catching the slight movement of her lips. "He knows everything," she whispered to the mirror. She walked back into the bedroom, grabbed Julian by the shoulder, and shook him awake violently. "Julian, wake up!" she hissed. Julian bolted upright, gasping for air. "Where is he? Is he watching us?" "Shut up," Harper snapped, slapping his arm to quiet him down. "Get a grip. He's playing mind games with us, Julian. He's trying to break our nerves. He knows everything." Julian began to weep openly. "He knows about the bolt. He knows about the AC. Did you hear what he said at dinner? He's torturing us. We have to go. We have to run right now." "We can't go anywhere," Harper said, gripping his face tightly to force him to look at her. "We have zero liquidity. Your firm's primary accounts were quietly frozen by the SEC this morning. If we run now, it's an admission of guilt. We lose the estate. We lose the $30 million policy. We lose everything." "We've already lost!" Julian cried out in despair. "He's going to hand us over to the Bureau." "No, he isn't," Harper said, her voice dropping into a dark, sinister whisper. If he were going to hand us over, he would have done it at the country club when the officers were standing right there. Then why is he doing this? Because he's losing his grip? Harper lied smoothly, even reaching out to fix Julian's disheveled hair. Listen to me, honey. He's old. The exposure out in that canyon scrambled his brain. He only remembers fragments. He's confused, and that's why he's acting out like this. He's just throwing a tantrum. Julian looked at her, his eyes desperate for something to believe. You really think so? I know so, Harper said coldly. But we can't keep living like this. He's dangerous, Julian. Look at the temperature in this house. He locked us in. He's a threat to himself and to us. So what do we do? Julian asked. Harper reached over to her designer handbag sitting on the nightstand, reaching inside to pull out a small orange prescription bottle. I found this in his private bathroom, she murmured. His heavy-duty blood pressure medication, beta blockers. Staring at the monitor, I felt a deep chill run through me. That wasn't my medication. I had never taken blood pressure pills in my life. She had clearly sourced that bottle from somewhere else entirely. So what? Julian asked. If he has another episode, Harper whispered softly, and his heart happens to stop due to an accidental overdose, nobody will question it. He's 70 years old and just barely survived a severe desert incident, an unexpected cardiac event brought on by heat trauma and stress. It's completely natural. Julian pulled back, looking horrified. No, Harper, we can't. We tried that once already. It failed. I can't do it again. We have to, she hissed, a dangerous fanaticism burning in her eyes. It's either him or us, Julian. Tomorrow he's going to call his lawyers to alter the trust and cut us out completely. We'll be left with nothing. Do you want to spend the rest of your life working a counter job? Do you want to end up in a cell? Julian stared intently at the small orange bottle. Just a little extra mixed into his routine, Harper said softly. I'll grind it into his black coffee tomorrow morning. He won't taste a thing. Julian hesitated, a massive struggle playing out in his eyes. His fear of me was fighting against his absolute terror of losing everything. All right, he finally whispered. Good boy, Harper said, leaning forward to press a kiss to his forehead. Now get some sleep. I'll handle the morning. I switched off the security monitor. I sat in the cool, comfortable air of my study, my hand resting quietly on the sterling silver handle of my cane. They were going to try again. They hadn't learned a single thing. They still foolishly believed that I was the one trapped inside this house, at the mercy of their choices. They had absolutely no idea that I was never the prey. I was the architect of their final reckoning. And tomorrow morning, breakfast would be served right on schedule. The early morning sun beat down heavily on the pavement outside the Lake Powell Marina, carrying the exact same suffocating intensity as the heat wave that had nearly ended me days ago. I sat in the back of the black, armored SUV. The dark-tinted windows blocked the harsh glare of the sun, keeping me invisible to the outside world as I watched my son-in-law, Julian, pacing back and forth along the wooden marina docks like a trapped animal. He looked exactly like a man waiting on the gallows, fully aware his time was up. He wore a massive pair of Ray-Ban sunglasses to hide his bloodshot eyes, and a baseball cap pulled low over his face to keep people from recognizing him. But his guilty body language gave him away completely. Every 30 seconds he checked his phone, nervously wiping the sweat from his palms onto his expensive trousers. He stared out at the water of Lake Powell with a mixture of intense desperation and sheer terror. Earlier this morning, while I was still in my study, the hidden listening devices caught Harper forcing this entire plan on him. Her voice cut right through the thin walls of the second-floor guest room. She told Julian the eco-cabin was a massive, dangerous loose end. She told him that the heavy exterior steel lock was physical proof of intent. She warned him that if the authorities ever decided to take a look at the cabin, they'd find the modified latch and the scratches I left behind while trying to break through the reinforced glass. The whole truth would come out. So she sent him to erase the evidence. She told him to coordinate with a black market scrap team to tear the structure down or simply hook it to a trailer and drop it into the deepest part of the lake. Make that thing disappear from the face of the earth, Julian, she had screamed hysterically. Blow it to pieces if you have to. Just don't let the authorities see that box. Julian had been terrified, arguing that the eco-cabin wasn't theirs to destroy, pointing out it was rented under a fake identity on the dark web using my credit profile as the guarantee. But Harper didn't care about legal details. She only cared about dodging a prison sentence. She forced a desperate kiss on him and gave him a cold ultimatum. Fix the cabin, or don't bother coming back alive. So now here he was, standing on the staging dock for the property that was meant to be my final resting place. I watched him step onto the floating dock, constantly looking over his shoulder like a thief. He pulled out a ring of keys and tried to unlock the heavy-duty pickup truck used for towing equipment, desperate to drag the cabin out into the wilderness and burn it to ash. But the truck didn't respond. Sitting in the back seat of the SUV, I tapped the remote lockout command on the iPad resting on my knees. I watched Julian descend into total panic. He twisted the key again. Nothing. He slammed his hands against the steering wheel in frustration, jumped out of the cab, and began checking the battery cables. He was absolutely drenched in sweat, a dark patch spreading across the back of his shirt. Just then, a heavily built man walked down the wooden dock. It was Sam, the private marina manager. Sam had forearms like tree trunks and a rugged face that looked like it was carved straight out of granite. He advanced on Julian with an imposing, steady pace, without a hint of a smile. I rolled my window down just a crack to capture the audio, the lake breeze carrying their words clearly. "Hey!" Sam called out sharply. "Step away from the vehicle." Julian jumped, nearly tripping over a heavy mooring line as he turned around. I'm just checking the connection," he stammered. "It won't start. I need to tow it out for maintenance." "You're not towing anything anywhere," Sam said, crossing his arms over his chest. "The rental period expired, and your account is severely overdue." Julian forced a hollow, nervous laugh that sounded incredibly strained. "Come on, Sam, you know me. I'm Arthur Pendleton's son-in-law. My father-in-law has endless assets. I just need to move this equipment to a different location for servicing." Sam shook his head. "No can do. The principal owner placed a total asset freeze on this entire operation." "Owner?" Julian looked completely baffled. "What are you talking about? Azure Canyon Rentals owns this facility. I have a binding agreement with them." Sam smiled, but it was a cold, knowing look, the grin of a man who holds all the cards. "Azure Canyon Rentals was fully acquired last Tuesday," Sam said. "A complete buyout. The new management is incredibly strict about unauthorized use, especially when it involves fraud and forged signatures on the paperwork." Julian's face turned completely white. "What do you mean forged? My father-in-law signed that agreement himself." "Is that so?" Sam stepped closer. "Because the new boss doesn't see it that way. In fact, he's on his way down here right now to handle this little contract dispute in person." Julian instinctively looked up toward the parking lot, his eyes landing right on my black SUV. He froze completely. I pushed the door open and stepped out into the blazing sunlight. I wasn't wearing my uniform today. I wore a perfectly tailored dark charcoal suit that fit impeccably. I held the silver-handled cane in my left hand, my leather dress shoes making a steady, rhythmic sound against the wooden planks as I approached. Click, click, click. Julian backed away until his shoulders hit the heavy iron railing of the dock. He was completely trapped, his target in front of him, and the deep water of the lake behind him. "Dad," he whispered, his voice failing him. I walked right past Sam, giving him a brief nod. "Good work, Sam." "Thank you, Mr. Pendleton," Sam said respectfully, stepping aside. "The assets are completely secured." I stopped right in front of Julian, looking at him, then out toward the eco-cabin sitting under the hot sun. I stared at the reinforced panels that were supposed to seal my fate. "Beautiful piece of design, son," I said smoothly. "A little tight on the ventilation, but I have to admit, the structure is solid." "Dad, what is this?" Julian's voice cracked in pure panic. "Sam said the firm was sold. He said, the new owner." I reached into the inside pocket of my suit jacket and pulled out a neatly folded legal document. "I bought Azure Canyon Rentals, Julian," I stated coldly. Julian blinked rapidly, stunned. You bought the company?" "Last Tuesday," I said, "while I was sitting in a safe house treating the raw burns on my back, and while you two were busy organizing my memorial service, I liquidated a few assets. I bought the holding firm that controls this marina and the rental operation that owns that cabin. I took a step forward, bringing the cane down hard against the wood. I am the sole owner of this property now, Julian. I own the land, I own the glass, I own the generator, and most importantly, I own the evidence you built for me. Julian shook his head in absolute denial, pressing his back against the railing. No, no, this is impossible. You were missing. You didn't make it out. I was busy, I corrected him. I pointed the tip of my cane toward the eco-cabin door. You see that lock on the frame, son? I asked. Julian didn't answer, his chest heaving as he hyperventilated. That's a custom edition, I said. A heavy external deadbolt that only slides from the outside. You can't just pick that up at a local hardware store. You have to order it custom, and you have to weld it on yourself. I looked directly into his panicked eyes. I had Sam audit all the maintenance logs. The rental firm has absolutely no record of that lock being installed. That means it was added by the lessee. That means you put it there, Julian. Julian raised his hands, pleading. Dad, please! That was just for protection. To keep out desert scavengers and trespassers. Trespassers? I let out a sharp, mocking laugh. On a secure reserve, you installed a heavy external locking bar on a sealed unit, just to protect me from trespassers? I stepped in even closer, locking eyes with him. You installed it to keep me in? I said sharply. You turned that place into a furnace, and now you're down here trying to destroy the crime scene. Julian completely broke. His knees gave out, and he dropped heavily onto the wooden planks, grabbing the hem of my trousers as he wept openly, entirely undone. It was Harper, he sobbed, tears running down his face. It was all her idea. She said we needed the cash to clear the fund. She said you just wouldn't step aside, that you were too stubborn to ever give us the inheritance. She made me do it, Dad. She made me install the bolt. I looked down at him, feeling nothing but profound disgust. A grown man trying to pass the blame for his own choices onto his partner. She didn't make you do anything, Julian, I said coldly. She gave you an option, and you chose to act on it. You're only weeping now because your plan didn't clear the hurdle. I reached into my pocket again, pulling out the iPad and lighting up the screen. But I have a final twist for you, Julian, I said, holding the screen right in front of his face. It was a perfectly clear infrared night vision feed aimed directly at the eco-cabin door. On the screen, Julian was standing right outside the entrance. The recording captured the exact moment he pushed the heavy steel bar into the slot. It captured the chilling seconds he paused, listening to me pounding desperately on the glass inside, before he turned around and walked right back to his vehicle without looking back. Julian stared at the screen, his voice dropping to a terrified whisper. Where did you get this? I tapped my cane against the deck railing. It's an off-grid, high-security facility, Julian, I said calmly. It's equipped with top-tier infrared security systems, front door feeds, perimeter monitors, and drone sweeps. The data encrypts and uploads to a secure cloud server every hour on the hour. I set the iPad down on the seat beside me. You forgot to cut the power to the external cameras, son. You were so hyper-focused on how you were going to bake me alive that you completely overlooked your own trail. Julian buried his face in his hands, trembling violently. Oh my God! Oh my God! I have the surveillance footage, I said, my voice cutting through the dry air. I have the original lease agreement where you forged my signature, and I have the receipts showing you purchased that heavy-duty deadbolt, which you paid for using my secondary credit card, by the way. Careless. Completely, fundamentally careless. I leaned down, bringing my face close to his ear. I control the crime scene, Julian, and I hold the physical evidence that proves your intent. Julian looked up at me, his eyes bloodshot and wide with panic. Are you handing me over to federal agents? He asked, his voice shaking. Are you calling the police? I stood up straight and casually adjusted the lapels of my tailored suit jacket. The authorities are for handling strangers, Julian, I said coldly. For you, I've planned a reckoning that makes a prison cell look like a luxury resort. I turned my back on him and looked over at Sam. Get him off my dock, Sam. Then tell the boys to dismantle that eco-cabin completely. The only piece I want kept intact is the heavy door with the external deadbolt. Wrap it securely in protective plastic and label it Exhibit A. You got it, Mr. Pendleton, Sam said. He grabbed Julian by the collar, pulling him off the deck planks as effortlessly as a piece of discarded luggage. Dad, wait! Julian shrieked as Sam dragged him toward the parking lot. Dad, what are you doing? I cast one final glance over my shoulder. I'm letting you go home, Julian, I said. I want you to walk right back to Harper. I want you to tell her yourself that the cabin is locked down. I want you to tell her that I bought the company. And most importantly, I want you to tell her that I hold the high-definition footage of exactly what you did. Julian struggled against Sam's grip, but Sam's forearms held him tight. Why? Julian yelled out in despair. Why do I have to tell her? Because I want to watch the two of you turn on each other, I said. I turned around, leaving him to his panic, and walked toward the edge of the water. The morning temperature was still climbing, setting the stage for another blistering desert day. But I didn't feel the heat anymore. The only thing I felt was the icy, razor-sharp edge of incoming justice. Go home, Julian, I whispered into the warm wind. Go home and tell your wife that the trap has snapped shut, and both of you are stuck inside. Behind me, I heard the screech of tires as Julian's truck backed up wildly, sped out of the parking lot, and tore down the road. He was completely broken, running on pure adrenaline. I took a long, deep breath of the air coming off the lake. The evidence was preserved. The location was secured. Now it was time to pull the trigger on their financial baseline. I pulled out my phone and dialed Elias. Initiate a complete freeze, I said. Every account? Elias asked. Every single one, I replied coldly. Every dollar, every cent. Cut off the credit cards. Cancel the fuel cards, the black cards, even the streaming services tied to my main profile. Cut the line completely. You want them out in the cold instantly? Elias asked. I want them back in the Stone Age by nightfall, I said. I hung up the phone and walked away from the dock, the steady thud of my boots sounding like a march to victory. The small waves lapped against the stone shore, sounding exactly like quiet applause. I got back into the SUV and drove away. The net was tightening around the targets, and they were running out of room to move, and I was just getting started. You've definitely heard the old saying, when a ship starts taking on water, the rats are the very first to run. They don't check on the captain. They don't look out for the other passengers. They just run for the exits. They'll step on each other, fight, and tear each other apart just to grab the last piece of dry wood before the cold water swallows them whole. Sitting in my living room, I watched the two biggest rats I'd ever known descend into absolute chaos. Harper had an escape plan. I knew she did because for the last 48 hours, I'd been quietly tracking her search history through the router's master logs. While Julian was being thoroughly handled down at the marina by my new manager, Harper was at home frantically packing. She wasn't throwing clothes or cosmetics into a suitcase. She was securing her remaining liquidity. Deep inside her walk-in closet, she kept a hidden bug-out bag. It contained her passport, a prepaid burner phone, and the digital access pins to a joint offshore savings account. For the past 2 years, she had been quietly siphoning funds into it from my trust like a parasite. She thought she was being brilliant. She figured that while Julian was playing distraction and dealing with the cabin mess, she could slip down to the First National Bank downtown, withdraw a massive lump sum of cash, and catch a flight to the Caymans before federal investigators could officially look into our little desert incident. She didn't care what happened to Julian. She didn't care about the $25 million Montecito estate anymore. She was running on pure survival instinct. I watched her exit the driveway at exactly 9 in the morning, and Hermes silk scarf wrapped around her head and massive dark sunglasses covering her face, looking like a low-budget actress trying to dodge the cameras. She drove that Mercedes G-Wagon like a race car, accelerating out of the estate without casting a single glance back at the home she had been willing to compromise her humanity to possess. She headed straight for the bank downtown. I picked up my iced tea and took a slow sip. It was cold, crisp, and sweet. Condensation rolled down the glass, dripping onto the back of my hand. It felt incredible. I wasn't in a rush at all. I had no intention of stopping her, because yesterday afternoon I had placed a crucial phone call. When you spend decades in federal law enforcement, you build bonds that never wear out. One of my old partners from my time in the Marshals Service was now running a high-level windowless office at FinCEN, the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network in Washington, D.C. We had stood side by side against cartel operators down on the Texas border years ago. I pulled him out of a burning structure during an operation and saved his life. He owed me everything. I called him yesterday. I told him I had detected massive irregular financial activity within my family's profiles, specifically involving Julian's venture fund, routing unexplained transfers through unregulated offshore cryptocurrency networks. I carefully hinted that the funds bore the distinct signatures of international structuring and money laundering, the exact kind of activity the federal government flags instantly. My old friend didn't even ask for physical paperwork. He just asked for the account numbers. So, while Harper was speeding down the highway, fully expecting to walk out of the vault with $200,000 in cash, a bright red flag was already flashing on a federal server in Washington. When that flag goes up, the asset freeze hits faster than liquid nitrogen. I closed my eyes and pictured the scene inside the bank vault. It was as clear as if I were standing right next to her at the marble counter. Harper would walk briskly up to the premier teller desk, forcing a tense smile, her hands trembling as she pushed the withdrawal slip across the counter. "I need a complete cash withdrawal," she'd say. "Close out the balance. Cash only." The teller would type the account number into the terminal, maintaining a polite nod. Then the expression on the teller's face would freeze. The smile would vanish. They would blink at the screen in disbelief. "One moment, Ms. Pendleton," they'd say, casually reaching under the desk to flag the security manager. Harper would tap her manicured nails impatiently against the counter. Tick, tick, tick. She'd check her watch, looking over her shoulder toward the main entrance. Then the branch manager would walk out. He wouldn't invite her into a private office with a polite gesture like he used to. He would stand at a safe distance behind the reinforced glass counter. "I'm very sorry, Miss Pendleton," he'd say, raising his voice just enough for the security detail nearby to lock their focus on her. "We cannot process this transaction." "What do you mean?" Harper would snap, her voice rising. "That's my money. I am a primary legal signer on that account." "The account has been fully restricted," the manager would state flatly. "It's a mandatory federal hold." A federal hold. Those words would hit her like a physical blow, draining every drop of color from her face. "FinCEN and Homeland Security," the manager would add, giving her the unblinking look reserved for high-risk profiles. "Under Section 311 of the Patriot Act, the account is flagged for suspected international structuring and illicit cryptocurrency routing." Illicit structuring, money laundering, those words were enough to break her completely. She wasn't some dangerous operative. She was just a greedy thief and a failed criminal. But when the highest level security alerts are triggered, a massive, unfeeling banking system doesn't stop to sort out the details. She would have looked around in total panic, watching the armed security guards near the entrance place their hands on their holsters and close the distance. She would have seen the other customers backing away from her like she was carrying a disease. She wouldn't dare stay to argue. She wouldn't dare ask for the branch manager. She would run. She'd grab her designer bag with a desperate grip and bolt out of the lobby like a chased animal, the sharp clatter of her heels echoing off the clean marble floor. She would leave every ounce of her dignity and all the money she had left sitting right at that counter forever. I checked my watch. 10:30. She'd be back at the house in 20 minutes, max, and she was going to be completely unhinged. I walked into the kitchen, refilled my glass with iced tea, and tossed in a heavy handful of ice. The sharp clink of the cubes hitting the glass sounded absolutely beautiful. Julian made it back first. When he stepped through the front door, he looked like a walking corpse clawed fresh out of the dirt. He had walked the entire 10 miles back from the marina because I had taken the liberty of freezing his rideshare accounts as well. His custom shirt was completely drenched, sticking to his frame, and his sun-exposed skin was bright red and peeling. He collapsed onto the couch like a sack of wet sand, staring blankly at the wall. He didn't even notice me sitting quietly in the shadows of the heavy armchair in the corner. I had become a fixture of the room, a silent observer waiting for the end. A moment later, the front door was thrown open with a violent slam. Harper stormed in like a hurricane. The silk scarf was gone, her hair was a disheveled mess, and her eyes carried a look of pure manic desperation. She looked exactly like a person who had just stared into the abyss and realized the abyss was smiling back at her. She locked her eyes right onto Julian slumped on the sofa. "You idiot!" she shrieked, throwing her designer bag straight at him. The heavy leather hit his chest with a dull thud. "What did you do, Julian?" she roared, marching right up to him. "What did you do with those crypto accounts? Who the hell were you dealing with?" Julian looked up blankly, his face a mask of total exhaustion and confusion. "What? Harper, what are you talking about? I lost the cabin. He bought the entire rental company. I don't give a damn about that glass box," she screamed hysterically, grabbing the lapels of his suit jacket. "I went to the bank. I tried to pull the cash out so we could run. It's gone, Julian. Every single cent. The whole thing is locked down." "Locked?" Julian repeated stupidly. "Illicit structuring and laundering," she yelled, shaking him violently. "The branch manager said it was flagged for illegal international routing. He said federal agencies locked down our entire portfolio because of your ridiculous digital asset projects. You absolute moron. You failure. Who were you doing business with? Were you cleaning money for cartels?" Julian shoved her off him. "No, I wasn't. I swear to God I wasn't. It was just a standard financial pump and dump scheme. It was regular corporate maneuvering. I never touched anything like that." "Well, someone with a badge in Washington thinks you did," she wept openly, pacing across the living room like a cornered lioness. "They locked down everything. The joint accounts, the offshore savings, even my private checking account, just because of the transfers between them. I have nothing, Julian. Zero. My credit cards were rejected at the pump. I had to coast back here on empty." She kicked the glass coffee table in front of her, sending a luxury crystal vase crashing to the floor, shattering into 1,000 jagged pieces. "We are trapped," she wailed in despair. "We have no liquidity. Our passports are useless. For all we know, federal agents are sitting outside this property right now." Julian buried his face deeply in his hands. "It's Dad," he sobbed hopelessly. "It's him. He did this." Harper stopped her frantic pacing. Her head snapped around, her gaze locking onto the dark corner where I sat. I raised my glass, took a slow, casual sip of my tea, and let the ice cubes clink softly. She stared at me with a look of pure, unadulterated venom. If looks could end a life, I would have dropped right there in the chair. But unfortunately for her, she had already tried that, and she had failed miserably. Her rage meant absolutely nothing to me. "It was you," she hissed like a snake. "You did this. You flagged us to the feds." I gently swirled the tea in my glass. "As a law-abiding citizen, I have certain obligations, Harper," I said, my voice smooth and perfectly conversational. "When I notice severe financial irregularities within my family estate that cross into federal jurisdiction, I have a duty to report it, especially when the primary suspect is living under a roof that I pay for." "You ruined us," she screamed hysterically, taking a wild step toward me. "You ruined everything." But she stopped dead in her tracks a few feet short. She didn't move to strike. Maybe she saw the heavy silver handle of the cane resting against my leg. Or maybe she finally remembered that I was a lawman who spent 35 years handling violent fugitives. And while she could barely balance in her heels, I knew exactly how to handle a threat. "You ruined yourselves," I said coldly, setting the glass down neatly on a coaster. "I just turned the lights on in the room." She snapped her head back toward Julian. "Do something!" she screamed at him frantically. "Hit him! Take him out! Do something, you spineless coward!" Julian looked up at me, then he looked back at her. He didn't move an inch. He stayed slumped on the cushions like a lump of clay. "You are completely useless!" She spit at him, her voice dripping with disgust. "A weak, pathetic mistake. I should have walked away years ago. I should have taken the cash and left." She swung her hand back and slapped Julian across the face, a sharp, vicious strike that echoed loudly through the quiet room. Julian took the blow cleanly. He didn't strike back. He just sat there, numbly accepting his punishment. I watched them with a detached coolness. The perfect Silicon Valley couple. The power partners who used to show off on the covers of local business magazines, reduced to this: a screaming wreck and a broken failure, tearing into each other over the scraps of a life they no longer controlled. "It's over, Harper," I said, standing up and leaning on my cane. "The money is gone. The Montecito dream is finished. And next, it's time to handle this property. What do you mean, this property? She asked, quickly wiping the moisture from the corner of her mouth, her guard instantly going up. I checked my watch. My private legal counsel should be filing the formal eviction notice with the court right about now, I said calmly. Since your accounts are entirely frozen, you obviously can't cover the monthly maintenance costs on this estate. And since the deed is held entirely under my name, I looked at her, letting a hard smile slip across my face. That makes you trespassers. Harper looked around the room, taking in the imported furniture she had carefully selected using my funds, looking at the luxury lifestyle built entirely on deceit. Suddenly she let out a sharp, unsettling laugh that sounded completely unhinged. You think you won? She challenged, stepping forward. You think you can just throw us out onto the street? She straightened her posture and touched her stomach. I'm pregnant. The room went completely dead silent. Julian's head snapped up. What did you say? You're pregnant? Yes, Harper lied without a single second of hesitation, her eyes moving rapidly. I took a test this morning. That's why I went to the bank. I was trying to secure a future for our child. She turned her gaze back to me, her lips curling into a smug, mocking sneer. Under state law, you can't just evict a vulnerable pregnant woman, Arthur. It's illegal. You can't throw your own grandchild out into the pavement. No judge will sign that order, and the public backlash would destroy you. I stared at her stomach for a moment, then raised my eyes to look her directly in the face. I reached into the inside pocket of my suit jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It wasn't a financial statement. It was a medical record. I figured you'd try that angle, I said, slowly unfolding the sheet. What is that? The smug look on her face began to crack. This is a private medical file from Dr. Evans, the premier OB-GYN in Beverly Hills, I said. He's the primary physician for the health trust I established for the family. I had his office pull the historical medical data for all family members last week. I held the report up for her to see. According to these official laboratory results from last winter, Harper, you underwent a permanent surgical procedure that makes conceiving entirely impossible. You can't have children. You haven't been able to for a year. The silence that followed was absolute. Harper looked like she had just taken a physical blow to the stomach. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The final lie had been stripped away, leaving her completely exposed. Julian turned his head slowly, looking at her with a mixture of total disbelief and pure hatred. You lied to me, he whispered. You lied about that too. I have the medical records, Harper, I said, tossing the paper onto the table next to the shattered vase. And I have the wire fraud documentation. The authorities will be here in the morning to serve the federal warrants for the insurance scheme. The game is fully finished. I walked toward the hallway, the steady sound of my cane hitting the floorboards, marking the end of the line. You tried to use the elements to finish me, I said, pausing at the doorway to look back at them one last time. But you forgot that I survived the desert. And tomorrow, the system you tried to cheat is going to lock the door on you. I stepped out, leaving them alone in the heat of the house, waiting for the dawn. Dr. Evans noted a very interesting procedure in your medical records, Harper, I said, reading from the page without a hint of emotion. A procedure you secretly had done 5 years ago, before you even knew Julian. I looked at the text and read it flatly. Patient successfully underwent a bilateral 2-ball ligation. Surgery completed without complications. Patient is permanently sterile. Julian instantly bolted upright from the sofa, his face turning as white as a sheet of paper. You had a 2-ball ligation? He whispered, his voice trembling in sheer disbelief. Harper's expression completely collapsed. The lies she had cooked up to save her skin evaporated like a drop of water under the desert sun, leaving behind the ugliest, harshest truth. Julian, let me explain, she stammered, backing away. My startup was taking off back then. I couldn't let a pregnancy ruin my body or my career. Kids are just too loud anyway. You lied to me this entire time, Julian roared like a wounded animal. You told me we were trying to conceive. You told me how much you wanted a family. You even told me we needed to raise all that money just to build a state-of-the-art nursery in Silicon Valley. I only told you what you wanted to hear, she shrieked back hysterically. Because you're nothing but a child yourself, Julian. You didn't want a wife, you wanted a mother to manage your life. Julian stared at her, and for the first time I saw a genuine spark ignite in his eyes. It wasn't love, and it wasn't fear anymore. It was pure, destructive hatred. He marched straight up to her, standing toe to toe with the woman who had pulled his strings like a puppet for 3 long years. Get out, he spit out through grit teeth. What did you say? She asked. Get out of my sight. Get out of this house. Julian screamed at the top of his lungs, shoving her back violently. You have no right to kick me out, she shrieked like a wild animal. We are in this together. Not anymore we aren't, Julian yelled. He snapped his head around and locked his eyes onto me. Dad, call the police, he said, his voice desperate but absolutely final. I raised an eyebrow. Call them, Julian repeated. Tell them how she siphoned the trust funds. Tell them how she forged your signatures on the contract. I'll turn state's evidence. I'll give them every single dirty detail on everything she's done. You wouldn't dare, Harper hissed at him like a cornered snake. You'll go down right along with me. I don't care anymore. Julian's voice broke completely, tears spilling over. I don't care about anything. I just want you gone. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I didn't dial the bureau just yet. It wasn't time. Instead, I called Elias. It's time, I said into the receiver. Bring the paperwork. I looked at the two of them standing in the absolute ruin of their marriage and their lives. The financial net I had cast around them had snapped shut perfectly. But for them, the true nightmare wasn't the frozen bank accounts. The true nightmare was the room they were currently standing in, and I was the only one holding the keys. The sun finally dipped below the desert horizon, but the darkness brought no relief from the suffocating heat or the intense tension lingering in the air. The house had become a physical and psychological pressure cooker. Hours ago, I used the master controls to shut down the central climate system completely. The thick, heavy desert air had settled into every single corner of the property like a wet blanket. I sat in the main living room beneath the high-arched ceilings. The space used to be filled with the gaudy, custom Italian leather furniture Harper had purchased using my hard-earned funds. I had rearranged the room. I pushed the expensive marble tables out of the way, dragging 2 heavy, straight-backed wooden chairs right into the center of the floor, facing the large, bare white wall above the fireplace. It was a staging setup I knew inside and out, one I had used countless times during my law enforcement career for tactical briefings, high-pressure interrogations, and internal hearings. The empty, focused layout was specifically designed to make a target feel completely small, exposed, and vulnerable. I sat in my dark leather armchair hidden away in the shadows. The only light in the room came from a high-powered commercial projector resting on the mahogany dining table. Its internal cooling fan let out a low, continuous hum that sounded like a heavy engine running in the distance. I glanced down at my tactical watch. 9 o'clock sharp. Time to start the proceedings. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't shout. I simply picked up a small brass bell from the fireplace mantel and rang it once. Ding! The sound was sharp and clear, cutting right through the dead silence of the house. Almost instantly, I heard heavy, panicked footsteps coming from upstairs. They had been waiting for this. They had been huddled in the sweltering guest room on the second floor like cornered prey, starving, terrified, and violently passing the blame back and forth. They knew that single chime meant the waiting was over and the real evaluation had begun. Julian came down first, looking exactly like a man walking toward a sentence. The collar of his custom shirt was wide open, his chest slick with a nervous sweat. His eyes darted around the room frantically, looking for a lawyer, a police officer, or any possible exit. But there was nothing. Every door was sealed shut with manual deadbolts. Every panoramic window was locked securely from the outside. The only way out of this room was through me. Harper followed right behind him. She had clearly tried to fix her disheveled hair, but the oppressive heat had won that battle completely. She stepped onto the floor with a rigid, defensive posture, her body tense. She glared at me, her lips pressed into a tight, pale line of absolute fury. She took in the humming projector and the 2 solitary wooden chairs, hesitating on the bottom step. Sit, I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it carried the unyielding tone of an operational commander, ordering the team into a breach. It left no room for hesitation. They walked forward nervously and took their places. Julian collapsed into his seat, his shoulders slumping completely. Harper sat rigidly on the very edge of her chair, refusing to show even a hint of weakness, despite the sweat running down her neck. "What is this, Arthur?" she demanded, her voice tight like a stretched wire. "What kind of game are you playing now? Are you trying to starve us out? Are you trying to leave us here to dehydrate?" I didn't answer her. I simply picked up the remote control from the table. "You wanted to know the truth, didn't you?" I said calmly. "You wanted to know how I walked out of that box alive? You wanted to know why I'm handling things this way?" I aimed the remote at the bare white wall. "I think it's time we watched a family video together." I pressed play. A bright beam of cold blue light cut through the dark, hitting the wall. The image flickered once, then stabilized into a crystal-clear, high-definition video feed. The timestamp in the upper corner read, June 18th, 11:30 a.m. The setting was the exterior deck of the remote desert eco-cabin. The wide-angle lens captured the reinforced glass door perfectly, along with the vast, lifeless canyon landscape behind it. Julian let out a sharp gasp, instantly recognizing the scene, and threw his hands over his mouth in terror. On the screen, a slightly more confident version of Julian stepped into the frame. He looked incredibly anxious, checking over his shoulder repeatedly like a thief, making sure the coast was clear. In his hands, he held a heavy, solid steel bar. I looked over at the real Julian sitting in the wooden chair. He was shaking his head in despair, tears streaming down his face. "No," he rasped, pleading. "Turn it off. Please, Dad, turn it off." I didn't turn it off. Instead, I raised the volume to maximum. On the screen, the recorded version of Julian struggled to push the heavy steel bar into the custom exterior brackets lining the doorframe. The harsh screech of metal against metal echoed loudly out of the projector's speakers, filling the silent living room. Click, thud. A moment later, the recorded version of Harper stepped into the frame, dressed in her silk outfit, holding an expensive drink on ice. She looked completely relaxed, entirely satisfied. She walked up to Julian, who was standing pale-faced in front of the sealed door, and casually placed a hand against his chest. I turned my head to look at the real Harper sitting in front of me. Every ounce of color had drained from her face as she stared wide-eyed at her own image on the wall. On the screen, the digital version of Harper smiled, a sharp, venomous grin. "Is it done?" the recording captured her asking. On screen, the digital version of Julian nodded blankly. "He's inside. The climate control system on the master board is completely severed. The backup power is cut too." "Perfect," the recorded version of Harper said, casually taking a sip of her drink. "Let that stubborn old man slowly bake in there." The real Julian let out a desperate, broken wail from his seat. The real Harper gripped the armrests of her wooden chair so hard her knuckles turned absolute white. But the video wasn't done playing. On screen, Julian glanced back nervously at the sealed door. "What if he wakes up?" he asked. "What if he starts screaming for help inside?" "Then let him scream," Harper laughed on the recording. "We're deep in the wilderness, babe. Nobody out here is going to hear an old man fading away inside a tin box." She walked closer to the door, pressing her face near the surface to listen. She casually tapped her manicured nails against the reinforced glass. "Hey, Arthur," her digital self called out mockingly. "Is it starting to feel a little warm in there?" She turned back to face Julian, letting out that unsettling laugh one more time. "Bake him," she said coldly on the video. "Let him cook, and then all that equity is finally ours." The video froze right on her face, her mouth wide open in laughter, her eyes hidden behind the dark shades, and the harsh red rock canyon looming behind her. "Let him cook." Those words hung in the warm air of the living room like toxic exhaust. I hit the stop button. The room plunged back into heavy semi-darkness, save for the blue standby light casting a square glow on the wall. I stood up, walked over to the mahogany table, and picked up the heavy manila envelope. It was packed with the weight of their choices. I walked directly over to them and threw the envelope onto the floor, right between their chairs. It landed with a heavy, solid thud, kicking up a tiny cloud of dust in the projector's remaining light. "Pinnacle Life Insurance," I stated coldly. Policy number 894221X. Julian flinched violently, as if I had dropped a live explosive at his feet instead of a stack of documents. The double indemnity rider for accidental death, I continued, my voice dropping into a low, dangerous rumble. $30 million. That was the price tag, wasn't it? That was the big payout for letting an old man cook. I began to pace slowly around their chairs, like a predator circling targets caught in a dead-end wash. You didn't just want me out of the picture. You wanted me to go through pure agony. You needed it to look like a desperate accident, just to trigger that double multiplier. You sat out on that climate-controlled deck, sipping high-end liquor bought with my money, while I was clawing at the walls of a glass furnace like a trapped dog. I stopped right in front of Harper. "And you laughed," I said. Harper looked up at me, the last of her arrogance and defiance crumbling completely. There was nothing left in her eyes but pure primal terror. "Dad," her voice shook so badly it was barely a whisper, that was just a joke. A bad piece of dark humor. I was completely drunk. I didn't actually mean it. Every single word out of your mouth was exactly what you intended." I roared, the sound cutting through the room. "I saw the messages to the realtor, Harper. I saw the wire activity. You were already moving to spend my assets before my body could even go cold. While I was crawling through a 120-degree duct like an insect just to survive, you were putting in an offer on a mansion in Montecito." I whipped around to face Julian. "And you?" I pointed the tip of my cane directly at his chest. "My dedicated son-in-law. The man who promised to treat me like his own blood. You personally slid that steel bar into place. You locked the door. You looked me in the eye that morning, smiled at me, and knew exactly what you were about to do." Julian slipped from his chair, dropping heavily onto his knees on the hardwood floor. He reached out to grab the hem of my trousers, but I stepped back with pure disgust. "Dad, please," he sobbed, pressing his forehead against the floor. "She forced my hand. She told me we had no choice. She said you were changing the trust to cut us out completely. She said if we didn't do it, the SEC would lock me away for the fund fraud, and we'd lose everything. I was terrified, Dad. I was a coward. I was too weak." "Weakness is never a justification for a reckoning," I snapped, my voice striking the air like a whip. I walked back to my armchair and sat down heavily, looking at the two broken, sweating figures in front of me as if they were nothing but debris. "Sitting right here in this room, I hold enough direct material to hand you both over to federal agents for the rest of your natural lives," I stated flatly. "High-definition footage of attempted murder, interstate insurance fraud, wire fraud, forged legal documents, and a massive laundering trail that Homeland Security is already tracking." I paused, letting the reality of their situation crush whatever defense they had left. A mandatory 25-year minimum, stretching to life without the possibility of early release. You will fade away inside a concrete box, exactly the way you planned to leave me in that glass one. Harper began to whimper quietly, while Julian rocked back and forth on the floor, letting out hollow groans of despair. However, I leaned forward slightly, my tone shifting completely into something smooth and businesslike. "I'm a practical man, and honestly, I'm tired. I have no desire to spend the next 2 years sitting in a federal courtroom, listening to a team of expensive lawyers spin a web of lies. I want this resolved now." I reached into my suit jacket, pulled out a single sheet of printed paper, and set it neatly on the small side table. "I'm prepared to offer a deal," I said flatly. "A one-time arrangement. Expired in 10 minutes. Both of their heads snapped up, a faint spark of desperate hope igniting in their hollow eyes like a dying flame. "The lead federal prosecutor for this district happens to be an old colleague of mine from my days in the service," I lied smoothly. "He's willing to authorize a highly favorable plea agreement based on my recommendation." I locked my gaze onto them. "One of you will step up and take the primary weight of the charges. Attempted murder, masterminding a major fraud scheme. The maximum terms served consecutively. Life." I looked from Julian to Harper, watching them closely. "The other person gets the plea agreement. Full cooperation, turning state's evidence, and testifying directly against the true mastermind who orchestrated the entire plot. 5 years of probation, 0 time inside a facility, a clean slate after supervision, and a lifetime debt of restitution paid directly to me. The room fell into another heavy, suffocating silence. I watched the psychological calculus take over. It started subtly, a quick defensive glance, a tightening of the jaw. In operational psychology, they call this the prisoner's dilemma, I said coldly. But in this family, let's just call it a business transaction. I tapped my fingers against the white paper on the table. I want to know who the architect was. I want to know who drove the operation. Who ordered that custom lock off the dark web? Who forged my signatures on the insurance policy? Who manipulated the smart system to cut the power? I stared directly at Harper. Was it him, Harper? Did he force your hand? Was he the aggressive partner who dragged you into a desperate plot to clear his own financial debts? Harper's eyes narrowed instantly. She whipped her head around, glaring at Julian with total calculation. I watched every ounce of whatever partnership they claimed to have evaporate into nothingness. I shifted my gaze to Julian. Or was it her, son? Was she the driving force whispering details into your ear? Did she threaten to walk away and leave you to face the SEC alone if you didn't secure that lock? Did she buy the components? Julian looked at Harper, seeing the complete malice in her expression. He saw the bus coming, and he could clearly see she was already reaching out to push him right under the wheels to save herself. You have exactly 10 minutes, I said, checking my watch. The first one to speak gets the paperwork. The second one takes the full fall. I leaned back into the cushions, crossing my arms over my chest. Go. For 5 solid seconds, nobody moved. The only noise left in the room was the persistent hum of the projector's cooling fan and the heavy, ragged breathing of 2 people suddenly realizing there was only one life jacket left on a sinking ship. Then Harper bolted upright. It was him! She shrieked hysterically, jamming a trembling finger directly at Julian. He did all of it, Arthur. He went onto the dark web and sourced the lock. He has the digital Bitcoin receipt on his device. He's the one who forged your policy. I have the backup emails on my personal cloud. He sent them from his own secure terminal. I begged him not to do it. I told him it was monstrous, but he told me he hated you. He said he wanted you gone so he could clear his debts and finally be free. Julian stared at her, his jaw dropping in absolute shock. You backstabbing snake, he roared, clawing his way up from the floor like a cornered animal. You lying piece of trash. You were the one who told me to get the lock. You used my secondary card because yours was already maxed out. You planned the entire route. You told me the exact minute to cut the secondary generator. He whipped around, his hands waving wildly in the air from pure rage and despair. Dad, she's lying. It's an absolute lie from start to finish. This whole thing was her design. She went to the underground brokers to secure the policy. She forged your signature. She practiced it for weeks. I found the scratch paper she threw in the bin, hidden right in the secret panel of her nightstand. She kept the drafts. She was the one who told me to let you cook, Julian screamed, his voice completely tearing apart. You heard her on the video. She was laughing. She said it was completely foolproof, that you were just an obstacle who should have stepped aside years ago. It was her. You desperate, projecting coward, Harper screamed back like a wild animal, launching herself at him, her nails clawing wildly for his face. You drove the car. You secured the bolt, because that was the only piece of actual labor a useless man like you could ever manage. And you lied to me about being pregnant. Julian shoved her back with everything he had, sending her crashing hard onto the rug. You said we needed the cash for our child. You used a fake pregnancy to blackmail me. I'm not pregnant, you brainless idiot. Harper spit at him as she scrambled back to her feet. I played you because you're weak. You're a spineless mistake who hides behind women because you can't stand on your own 2 feet. She turned back to face me, her perfectly made-up face twisted into an incredibly ugly mask of pure desperation. Arthur, look at him. He's completely pathetic. He can't even manage a birthday party, let alone a high-stakes hit. I hold the real leverage. I have recordings. I recorded all our conversations, Arthur, just in case a coward like him tried to back out at the last second. I have the tapes of him planning it all. 你竟然透露我? Julian's voice shook in pure disbelief. It's called insurance, babe, Harper sneered, her eyes dripping with pure malice. Just insurance. She turned her gaze back to me, looking like a demon that had finally secured its prize, her eyes filled with triumph. I'll give you the tapes, Arthur. I'll give you the exact timeline. I'll hand over every piece of evidence. Let him rot in a cell for the rest of his life. Just give me the agreement. That's our deal, right? I sat quietly in my comfortable leather chair, watching them tear each other apart. It was a display of raw, sickening survival instinct. This was the true shape of their souls, exposed completely under the harsh light of their choices. They had completely forgotten I was even in the room. They were just two rats in a dark drain, tearing into each other over a floating piece of wood. I stood up. "Enough!" I barked, the sound echoing through the room. They froze instantly, their chests heaving as they gasped for air, their eyes locking onto me. I walked over to the projector and hit the power switch. The room plunged into absolute darkness. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows, grabbed the heavy velvet curtains, and pulled them back with a violent rip. The cold, unfeeling light of the desert moon flooded the living room. "I've heard everything I need to hear," I said coldly. Harper took a panicked step forward. "Who gets the agreement?" she demanded. "Who wins?" I looked at them both. "You both lose," I said. "What?" Julian cried out. "But you said—" "I said I would recommend a favorable path for the partner who cooperated," I said flatly. I turned my focus to Harper. "You just openly admitted to conspiracy to commit a major felony. You admitted to keeping recorded audio of a hit in progress. You admitted to total knowledge of the crime from day one." I shifted my gaze to Julian. "And you admitted to executing the physical act. You admitted to sliding that steel bar into place yourself." I walked back to the small table and picked up the paper. It wasn't a plea agreement at all. It was just a blank sheet I had pulled from the printer minutes ago. "There is no agreement," I said, exposing the lie. "I played you." Every drop of color left their faces, leaving them looking paler than corpses. "You can't do this!" Harper shrieked hysterically. "You gave your word." "I gave you a chance to show a shred of humanity," I cut her off sharply. "But you proved to me that you're both absolute monsters. You sold each other out in less than 30 seconds. There is zero loyalty between you. There is no love. There is only raw greed and pure cowardice." I pulled my phone out of my jacket pocket. The screen showed an active call that had been running for over 20 minutes. "Did you catch all of that, Elias?" I asked into the speakerphone. Every single word, loud and clear, old friend. Elias's steady voice boomed through the speaker. "The heavy units are already positioned outside the gates. We have the full confessions on record. We have the direct finger-pointing. This is more than enough to lock them away beneath the foundations of a federal facility forever." "The police," Harper whispered, her voice a hollow gasp. "They've been listening the entire time," I declared coldly. I walked to the front entrance and turned the heavy brass deadbolt. Wooly Suo. I threw the massive oak door wide open. Out on the driveway, the blinding red and blue lights of federal units were already flashing violently, cutting through the palm trees in the front yard. I turned back to look at my daughter and son-in-law. "You wanted a major liquidity event, didn't you?" I pointed out toward the armed federal agents advancing down the path. "Well, this is your event. Your accounts are fully settled." Julian's knees buckled and he dropped heavily to the floor, weeping like a helpless infant. Harper just stood there frozen, staring at me with a look of total out-of-body shock. The performance was over. The curtain was coming down, and the only applause left was the sharp click of steel handcuffs locking into place. The sound of sirens usually represents chaos, but tonight it felt like the final notes of a grand symphony. It was the climax of an opera regarding greed and ruin that I had been orchestrating for the past week. The flashing lights cut across the living room walls, mixing with the harsh overhead lighting I had switched back on. In that light, every shadow they used to hide their dirty secrets was completely erased. They had nowhere left to run. The front doors weren't just pushed open, they were taken by force. Senior Agent Matthews from the Bureau walked in first. His weapon remained holstered, but his hand rested firmly on the grip, ready for any sign of resistance. Behind him came 2 financial analysts from the fraud division and 4 heavily armed local officers. They filled the open foyer instantly, bringing the heavy absolute pressure of the law with them. They didn't look like visitors. They looked like cleaners sent to sweep away a mess. Julian scrambled backward on the floor like a crab, his shoes digging into the Persian rug until his back hit the brick wall of the fireplace. He was hyperventilating, his face a mask of pure terror, as his eyes darted between me and the incoming agents, his brain still trying to reject the reality crashing down on him. Harper held her ground for one fraction of a second longer. She instinctively smoothed out her messy dress, raising her chin slightly as if trying to summon the arrogance that used to serve her so well in Silicon Valley. But I could see her hands shaking violently. Her eyes darted toward the kitchen side door, calculating the odds of making a break for it in her heels, and she knew the chances were zero. Agent Matthews stepped into the center of the room. He looked at me, giving a brief nod, a silent acknowledgement of the signal I had routed through Elias. Then he turned his cold gaze onto the two figures, trembling before him. "Julian, Harper," Matthew's voice boomed under the high ceilings. "You're under arrest. On what grounds?" Harper let out a sharp, piercing shriek that rattled the room. "This is just a family dispute. My father suffered trauma out in the desert. He's completely disoriented. He locked us in here. You should be arresting that old man." Matthews didn't even blink. He reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a folded legal document. "We have warrants signed directly by Judge Patterson of the Federal Circuit," he stated with absolute calmness. "Based on the extensive digital logs provided by Arthur Pendleton, the complete audio wire transcripts, and the sworn statements from your former leasing representative at the marina." He took a step forward, the authority of his badge pinning them in place. "You're being charged with attempted murder, conspiracy to commit interstate wire fraud, federal insurance fraud, grand theft, and severe elderly abuse." "Elder abuse?" Harper mocked in absolute disbelief, letting out a sharp laugh. "We've been taking care of him this entire time." Matthews looked around the space, his eyes taking in Harper's sweat-soaked designer dress, the lockdown windows, and the digital display on the console that still read 85 degrees. "Looks like you were trying to serve him up well done," Matthews said with dry sarcasm. "Officers, secure the suspects." What followed was completely ugly. It wasn't like a movie scene where the criminals gracefully raise their hands and walk away with their dignity intact. It was a chaotic, desperate struggle on the floor. Julian lost his nerve completely. As a heavily built officer stepped toward him with a pair of steel cuffs, Julian suddenly lunged forward, not at the police, but directly at Harper. "This is all your fault," he shrieked hysterically, his voice breaking from pure rage. "You lied to me. You promised me we were perfectly safe. You swore the old man was gone." He grabbed Harper's arm with a desperate grip, his fingers digging hard into her skin. "Tell them," Julian yelled, his eyes wide. "Tell these officers it was your entire design. Tell them you made me secure that damn lock." "Get off me, you useless mistake!" Harper shrieked like a wild animal, her long nails scratching wildly across Julian's face, leaving deep red marks across his cheek. "It was you. You drove the car. You secured the bolt. You're the cold-blooded murderer here. I was just forced to watch." Several officers moved in instantly, pulling the two figures apart. It took two grown men to pin Julian down as he kicked and thrashed against the furniture, realizing everything he valued was slipping away. They pulled his arms behind his back. Click, click. The sharp sound of steel cuffed tight against bone filled the room, a noise that carried a total sense of finality, the sound of a heavy door shutting for a very long time. The moment the cold metal touched his skin, Julian stopped fighting. He went completely limp, slumping onto the rug and weeping openly, a total mess of tears and panic as his breath caught in his throat. "Dad," he sobbed into the carpet. "Dad, please. I'm your son-in-law. Don't let them take me away. I can't survive in a facility. I'm not built for prison life." I leaned against the mantel, holding my silver cane, looking down at him. "You're right, Julian," I said, my voice low and steady. "You aren't built for a cell. You were only built for air-conditioned country clubs and comfortable transactions. You're soft." I watched two officers haul him up like a heavy sack of gravel. "But you'll have to learn to be tough in there," I added coldly. "Just like I had to learn to be tough when you locked me inside that sealed box." Harper, on the other hand, chose a completely different approach. As the officers reached for her wrists, she didn't fight back with force. Instead, she leaned into her final weapon, the most dangerous thing she had left, a complete lie. She dropped heavily to her knees, looking up at Matthews and then at me with an expression of pure innocence and desperation. "Wait!" she cried out dramatically. "You can't do this to me. You have to be careful." She glared at the officer holding her arm. "Get your hands off me. I'm pregnant." The entire living room went dead silent. The officer hesitated, looking over at Matthews. No matter the profile of the suspect, no lawman wanted to risk handling a pregnant woman carelessly. Harper caught that brief hesitation instantly, holding on to it like a lifeline. She poured every ounce of her manipulation into playing the victim. "I'm carrying a child," she wept, covering her flat stomach with her hands. "I'm still in my first trimester. It's a high-risk pregnancy. This stress and physical force could cost me the baby. Do you want that weight on your conscience?" She dragged herself forward on her knees toward me, pulling the officer a few inches along with her. "Dad, please," she begged, tears streaming down her face. "I know you hate me. I know I made a monstrous mistake, but this is your grandchild, your only bloodline, Julian's baby. You can't let your own grandchild be born inside a federal correction facility. Please, just let me stay under house arrest until the baby is born." I watched her flawless performance with a detached coolness. If I hadn't already pulled the facts, I might have felt a shred of doubt. She looked completely small, entirely desperate. Julian looked up from the floor, a sudden spark of frantic hope in his eyes. "Dad," he rasped, "she's right. The baby. You always wanted a grandchild. You can't let anything happen to an innocent child." Matthews turned to look at me, a slight frown on his face. "Mr. Pendleton, if she's actually expecting, we have strict administrative protocols to follow. We'll need an ambulance to clear a full medical check at the hospital first. It complicates the processing significantly." I looked at Harper, catching the tiny hidden flash of victory behind her tears. She thought she had found the ultimate loophole. She thought she had found the one weakness that would make a veteran lawman go soft. Family bloodline. I reached slowly into the pocket of my suit jacket and pulled out the medical report I had unfolded earlier. I walked over, standing directly in front of her, casting a heavy shadow over her face. "Stand up, Harper," I commanded coldly. She stood up, wiping her eyes quickly. "You believe me, right, Dad? You won't let them hurt your grandchild?" I held the document up right in front of her eyes. "I told you inside, Harper." My voice was completely ice. "I pulled the real medical files. I hold all the cards." I turned back to look at Matthews. "Agent, this woman isn't expecting anything. It's a physiological impossibility." The color drained from Harper's face instantly. She lunged forward, trying to tear the paper from my hand, but the officers held her wrists tight. "That's a lie!" she shrieked hysterically. "That document is a forgery." I raised my voice, reading the text clearly so every person in the room could hear it, especially Julian. Patient name, Harper Pendleton. Date of procedure, August 12th, 2018. Procedure, bilateral 2-ball ligation with total excision. The primary surgical notes confirmed the pathways were fully cauterized and severed. The patient is permanently sterile. I lowered the sheet. "You had the procedure done 5 long years ago, Harper," I said, locking eyes with her. "Before you even met my son-in-law." Julian let out a sound that didn't even sound human, a guttural broken cry of absolute despair. You, what?" he gasped out. Harper spun around, trying to talk over the truth, desperate to assemble a new lie on the spot. But the ugly reality was fully out in the open. That was because of a medical history issue," she stammered wildly. "The procedure is reversible. I was planning to clear the reversal surgery later." "It's completely irreversible, Harper," I said, cutting off the illusion. "Not the method you chose. You wanted to make sure there were 0 complications for your startup career and your lifestyle. So you chose the most permanent option available." I turned my head to look at Julian, who looked completely paralyzed. "She's been playing you from day one, son," I said. "The nursery she talked about, the timeline she built, she used your deep desire to build a family to pull your strings and turn you into a participant in a hit." Julian stared at her, the betrayal absolute and crushing. He finally realized the woman he had compromised his entire soul for had never held a shred of regard for him. He was just a convenient tool to back her fund and take the fall. "You monster," Julian whispered, his voice broken. "You absolute monster. The final mask fell from Harper's face completely. The tears vanished, the pleading ended, and her expression twisted into a look of pure, unadulterated malice. "Shut your mouth," she spit at Julian. "Shut up, you weak piece of garbage. Not bringing a child into your mess was a blessing. You'd be a pathetic father anyway, a bankrupt coward." She snapped her head back toward me, her eyes filled with venom. "And you," she hissed maliciously, "you stubborn old animal. You should have faded away in that box. The world would be a much better place without you holding on to all that equity. I hope you rot alone in this empty house. I hope you pass away with no one by your side." I just smiled, a perfectly calm, undisturbed look. "I won't be alone, Harper," I said softly. "I have my honor, I have my integrity. And right now, I have the immense satisfaction of watching the system clear the room of 2 pieces of garbage." I nodded to Matthews. "Take her out, Agent, and tell your team to keep a close eye on her. She isn't expecting, but she's toxic." An officer grabbed her arm firmly. "Let's go, Miss Pendleton," he said flatly. "You have the right to remain silent. I highly suggest you start using it." They dragged her out of the room. She had lost her mind completely, screaming profanities, kicking at the doorframe and spitting at the detail. She was entirely unhinged, finally showing the world the true, ugly nature hidden behind her luxury clothes. Julian was carried out like a sack of discarded debris, unable to look me in the eye as they passed. He kept his head down, completely broken by the weight of it all. I watched them go, standing on the porch as the red and blue lights illuminated the gravel path, watching the officers load them into the back of the transport vehicles. Thud, thud. The heavy doors slammed shut. As the convoy rolled down the driveway, the sirens faded into a distant whine. The massive silence returned to the estate, but it wasn't the suffocating, tense quiet of a heat wave. It was a clean, crisp stillness. The quiet that comes after a powerful storm has cleared the air completely. I walked back into the living room, looking at the overturned chair and the humming projector. I picked up the copy of the medical report from the table, walked over to the fireplace, and used a brass lighter to catch the corner of the sheet. I watched the orange flames consume the paper, watching the lies curl up into black ash. "Never bring an innocent life into a mess like this," I whispered to the fire. I was entirely alone, but for the first time in years, I didn't feel lonely at all. I felt completely clean. The spray hitting my face felt entirely different today. It wasn't the heavy, suffocating dry heat of a desert canyon trying to end a life. It was a crisp, cool breeze, like the welcome greeting of an old friend. I stood at the bow of my private boat, the teak deck vibrating solidly beneath my feet from the smooth, powerful hum of the twin engines. The vessel cut through the deep blue waters of Lake Powell with pure elegance, its white hull shining under the crisp December sun. I walked over to the side railing and looked down at the name painted neatly across the hull, The Survivor. It had been 6 months since that hot June night. 6 months since the system took over and put Harper and Julian exactly where they belonged. Their final trial had concluded 3 weeks ago in a federal building in Phoenix. It didn't take long. With the high-definition infrared video, the full audio transcripts from the wire, the forged documents, and Julian's complete breakdown as state's evidence, the jury reached a verdict in less than 2 hours. Julian took a plea deal, 25 years in a federal facility for conspiracy to commit wire fraud and attempted murder, with 0 chance of early release. He got exactly what he deserved for his choices. Harper fought it until the end, hiring a team of expensive defense lawyers paid for by liquidating her remaining startup shares. She tried to argue the video was manipulated, that she was under duress, that I was an abusive father. But the law doesn't care about a narrative when the material evidence is absolute. She was convicted on all counts. The judge handed down the maximum sentence: life without parole at a high-security facility. She wanted to lock me in a box to claim $30 million. Now she'll spend the rest of her days looking through the bars of a cage she built for herself. The $25 million Montecito estate returned to the market, the deposit forfeited entirely. Julian's venture fund was completely dissolved by federal regulators to pay back the investors he defrauded. Everything they built on lies turned to dust. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a velvet pouch. sliding the diamond and sapphire pendant out into my palm. The stones caught the light, shining with a quiet beauty. I held it for a moment, remembering Sarah, remembering the long years of hard work it took to afford it, and the love we shared. Harper had tried to turn this memory into a trophy for a crime, but it was back where it belonged. I hooked the clasp and placed it carefully into a small, watertight lockbox I kept anchored inside the boat's cabin, right alongside my old tactical watch. The sanctuary was restored. Elias walked out from the wheelhouse holding 2 cold beverages. He handed me a simple bottle of bourbon and kept a cold beer for himself. He looked out at the massive red rock canyon walls rising from the water, their reflections stretching across the surface. "An error in the smart system log," Elias said, taking a sip. "That's really what brought down a multi-million-dollar Silicon Valley operation." "They got caught up in the details," I said, leaning my arms against the rail. "They spent so much time calculating the payout that they completely forgot how the underlying system functions." "What are you going to do with the Nevada ranch, Arthur?" Elias asked. "The lithium buyers are still calling my firm every week trying to get a meeting with you." I took a slow sip of the bourbon, letting the warmth settle in. "I think I'm going to keep it exactly as it is," I said. "A quiet place for cattle and the wind. I don't need any more liquidity events, Elias. I have everything I need right here." We rowed out deeper into the channel, leaving the docks behind as the boat cut smoothly through the water. The air was cool, the sky was clear, and the desert stretched out wide around us. My daughter thought she could use the extreme heat to erase a stubborn old man. She thought she could take everything I worked for and leave me to fade away alone in the dark. But she forgot that the law doesn't just rest on a badge or a gavel. True justice is an unyielding force, and when you try to bend it to serve your own greed, it snaps back hard enough to break you. I am Arthur Pendleton. I made it out of the box. I survived the heat, and I reclaimed my life. Thank you for watching the full story. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more. Stay sharp out there, and remember, when you build a trap for someone else, make sure you aren't the one stepping inside. 6 months ago, that hellhole deep in the canyon was called the Desert Eye. It was a rented high-tech trap, a solar-powered greenhouse built with the sole intention of baking a father alive. But the Desert Eye doesn't exist anymore. I bought the entire rental company. I fired every single employee who turned a blind eye. And then I had the structure stripped down to its bare metal frame. I tore out every inch of the leather upholstery caked in my sweat. I smashed the insulated glass panels I had once clawed at to survive. And most importantly, I personally took an industrial torch and cut that heavy steel locking bar, the one used to seal my fate, into useless pieces of scrap metal. Now, the vessel rebuilt from those ruins belongs fully to me. I renamed her the Phoenix because she rose directly from the ashes of betrayal. And so did I. I'm not wearing an uncomfortable tailored suit today. I'm not wearing a heavy dress uniform either, just a simple linen shirt and casual shorts. The deep marks across my back, where the galvanized ductwork stripped away my skin, have faded into thin silver lines. The severe burns on my face have fully healed, leaving behind a rugged, healthy bronze. I feel younger than I have in a decade. Maybe it's the crisp lake air. Or maybe it's just the sheer weight I lost when I cut a 200-pound malignancy completely out of my life. My hands are holding a small box crafted from fine cedar, radiating the scent of old memories. There are no human remains inside this box. What lies within is a ghost. I lift the lid, revealing a handful of gray ash and charred fragments. Just last night, I built a fire in the pit behind my estate. I climbed up to the attic and dragged down the old storage boxes labeled Harper. I found her grade school spelling bee participation trophy, the kind of plastic junk they hand out just for paying the entry fee, even though she spent most of the event complaining about the air conditioning. I found her Ivy League acceptance letter, a foot in the door I had to manufacture by spending $50,000 on a high-priced consultant to polish her incredibly mediocre records. I found the very first Father's Day card she ever gave me, where she even managed to spell our last name wrong. I threw every single bit of it into the fire. I watched it burn without a hint of emotion. I watch the cheap plastic trophies melt into a toxic dark sludge. I watch the pages of documentation turn into black embers, drifting up into the silent Arizona night sky. It wasn't a crime of anger. Anger burns too hot. Anger means you still care. This was purely deep cleaning. I was just taking out the trash. And now, standing over the deep blue water, I hold the very last of the debris. I reach into the cedar box and grab a handful of the gray ash. It feels rough against my palms, exactly like the gritty sand that stuck to my raw wounds when I crawled out of that canyon. "Goodbye, Harper," I whisper into the wind. I open my fingers. A strong gust off the lake sweeps the ash away instantly. It spins violently through the air, forming a brief, faint cloud against the clear blue sky before dissolving entirely into the white wake rolling behind the boat. The vast water swallows it effortlessly without leaving a single ripple. I keep grabbing the ash until the box is completely empty, then brush the remaining dust from my hands. I don't feel a shred of sorrow. I don't feel the weight of loss. The only thing I feel is a heavy, rusted lock inside my chest, finally releasing with a clean, clear click. I turn around. Elias is sitting in the captain's chair, holding a cold beer. He came out specifically to sail with me today. He's the only real family I have left in this world. "All done?" Elias asks, glancing at the empty box. "It's over," I say. "The nursery built on big promises is officially closed." Elias nods, reaching for his briefcase, an item that looks completely out of place on a sunlit boat. But that's just how Elias operates. When there's an operational detail to handle, he never shows up empty-handed. "I have the final execution copy of the trust revision, Arthur," he says, pulling a thick stack of paperwork from the leather bag. "It just needs your signature to become legally binding." I walk over, take the pen from his hand, and look down at the title page. "The Pendleton Foundation for Homeless Veterans and Disabled Law Enforcement Officers." It's a straightforward, cleanly drafted document, but it carries the entire weight of a massive empire. The terms state that upon my passing, or ahead of schedule at my immediate command, every single asset under my name will transfer directly to the Foundation. My estate, my multi-million-dollar stock portfolio, my liquid capital, and that highly valuable lithium ranch in Nevada. Everything. Every single cent will be utilized to build secure housing and provide operational retraining for veterans who sacrificed for this nation only to return to nothing, and for lawmen severely injured in the line of duty. The equity will belong to individuals who actually comprehend the meaning of loyalty, people who have bled in the suffocating heat and stood their ground when the pressure was absolute. They didn't do it for an inheritance. They did it for the badge on their chest and the flag behind them. I sign my name cleanly, Arthur J. Pendleton. The script is sharp, without a single tremor. "What about the special rider at the bottom?" Elias asks, pointing to the final block on the last page. I look down at the clause. It's my absolute favorite part of the entire file. "To my daughter, Harper Pendleton, and her husband Julian, both currently serving their terms in a maximum security federal facility, I hereby leave the total cash sum of $1 each." Elias lets out a dry, brief smile. $1 each, Arthur. The review judge might think you're being a bit petty." "It's not petty at all, Elias," I say, capping the pen calmly. "It's pure utility." "How so?" "The cost of a single first-class stamp inside a federal facility is roughly 68 cents right now," I say. "I wanted to ensure their substantial inheritance provides just enough liquidity to purchase one envelope and one stamp." "So they can write you an apology?" Elias raises an eyebrow. "No," I say, looking out toward the horizon. "So they can write to each other from their respective facilities. Because there isn't a soul left in the outside world who's ever going to open their mail again." I picture them sitting in their cold cells right now. Julian broke completely before the trial even started, eagerly taking a deal from the prosecution. 20 years. At his sentencing hearing, he wept like a child, begging the bench for leniency, claiming he was under extreme psychological manipulation. But the presiding judge was a zero-tolerance woman who detested cowards who target their own family for financial gain. She handed down the maximum term allowed under the agreement. By the time he steps past the gates, He'll be a 55-year-old man with soft hands, a major federal felony on his record, and absolutely nothing to his name. Harper fought it all the way to a jury. She chose the courtroom, arrogantly believing she could use her appearance and some rehearsed tears to sway the room. She thought she could manipulate the facts. But the federal prosecutor played every single tape. He put the high-definition footage of her laughing on that sunlit deck right on the big screen. He introduced the laboratory files, exposing exactly how she used a fabricated pregnancy as a vicious tool for emotional leverage. The jury took less than 45 minutes to return a verdict. Guilty on all counts. A straight 25-year sentence. She screamed hysterically as the marshals escorted her from the courtroom, throwing the blame wildly at Julian, at me, at the system. But within her warped logic, she never once realized it was her own choices that put her there. I take the cold drink Elias passes me. The liquid is crisp, tasting entirely of freedom. I walk back to the railing. The sun is beginning its slow descent, painting the canyon walls in deep shades of gold and purple, the exact same colors I saw out in the brush when I was fighting for my last breath. But today I stand above the water. I look back at that grueling journey, the crushing heat, the dark crawl space, the profound betrayal. It tore my world apart, yes, but it saved my humanity. If Harper hadn't locked me in that cabin, I might have passed away a year from now in my sleep, completely blindsided by some quiet poison, leaving everything to a daughter who held nothing but malice for me. I would have let my life's labor be thrown away on luxury estates and fraudulent crypto accounts. I would have stepped into a casket under the foolish illusion that I was cared for. The cold truth is a brutal medication, but it cures the disease completely. I take a slow sip, watching the wake of the phoenix clear the water. The white foam rolls violently for a moment before disappearing completely into the deep blue expanse. The channel ahead looks completely clear, Elias, I say. Elias raises his bottle. To open waters, old friend. I take the wheel, turning the vessel in a sharp, graceful arc, advancing at full throttle toward the shore, toward my future, and toward the work I have left to finish. I'm not just a survivor anymore. I'm a builder, and I'm going to construct something that outlasts a compromised bloodline. I am looking directly at you, the person behind the screen who followed this journey from that suffocating glass oven all the way out to this open lake. People say blood is thicker than water, but when pure greed enters the mix, it dissolves the strongest bonds like acid. My daughter thought she could discard me like old luggage, but she made a fatal mistake. She forgot that I spent my entire life navigating storms she couldn't even fathom in her climate-controlled world. I didn't survive that heat wave to seek out a personal grudge. I survived to see absolute justice served. If you raise a child without teaching them that everything must be earned through honest sweat, don't be surprised when they try to cut the cord the moment they think the estate is ripe for the taking. Watch your perimeter, protect your baseline, and never, ever turn your back on deep water or a greedy air. If you found value in this journey aboard the Phoenix, do me a favor. Hit that like button with everything you've got, just like I hit that reinforced door lock. Subscribe to this channel where you'll hear more real accounts of justice being served cold and without compromise. And let me know in the comments, if you were in my shoes, would you have left them the $1 insult, or would you have cut them off completely without a single cent? I'll be reading through your responses from the deck. Until next time, stay alert and watch your back. Arthur out.